Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Eddard Stark character stream. My good friend Greywaste Tim will be joining me any moment. I, as you know, am a little disorganized, and so I just sent him the link. Oh, and here he is now. Greywaste Tim, you heard your name, and you appeared. Hello.
Oh, are we live already?
Oh, are we? Yes. We're live, Tim. Hello. Say hello to
Oh,
the lovely
hello.
people. It's not usually how we do it.
Hello.
Yes, I know. I was feeling bad that we hadn't started yet, so I just went live and figured you'd pop in when you popped in, and now you popped in, and here we are.
All right. sorry, I'm just a little jarred from it. Okay.
Yeah, no, reorient yourself. You're disoriented. You've just been thrust into the Lovecraftian dream world. You don't know what's going on. You just have to collect your bearings and figure out what's happening.
Dad threw me in the pool, sink or swim.
But your audio is good, so if you'll just angle your camera down a little bit so that I'm not towering over you, then that'll be so you can see whatever. Yeah, I see you're wearing a clever shirt as always. There we go. A little better. Down, up. What do you got today? A Cthulhu shirt? I got a Wu-Tang shirt.
Yeah, it's a Cult of Cthulhu Ale, Imperial Stout.
Okay, that's kind of got some northern vibes. Stout ale. That's what they drink in the north. I'm repping the slums of Shaolin here because Eddard Stark is a bad mother effer. That's right. He does a mess around, cuts people's heads off. And, the genesis of this stream, I will just tell you, I called this the most feared man in Westeros, Tim, an audience, because it's really something that's obscured by the perspective of the story. We see Ned from the perspective of his kids, and we're in his own head where we see all his doubts and fears. But to everyone else, he's the most feared man in Westeros, and you can tell by the way everyone treats him and acts around him. And so that's the first thing I want to get into today. But honestly, and I need to, or chat is not updating, Tim. There we go. Hello, chat. You're now part of things. You're now part of this. Welcome. We're all here. Tim's here. We're all jarred and disoriented, but Eddard Stark is very oriented. He is the compass of morality for the Stark children. He is solid and sturdy like a tree. And he did a lot of crazy stuff when he was only 19. So there's a reason why he feels like a badass, because he is one. And so we're gonna start with that angle, but then we'll get into all the other angles on Ned. So this will be a character study, not a symbolism heavy stream, not a deep ones stream. Although Tim's here, so you never know. But we'll mostly be talking about Ned Stark, the person, Eddard, Lord Eddard Stark, who carries around a 6-foot Valyrian steel sword, cuts people's heads off, makes his kids watch, and makes them swear to do the same when it's their turn. So, Judge Dreddard. That was my joke. Judge Dreddard. He is judge, jury, and executioner. And so yeah. Thank you, Gabe the Griffin. Obligatory monthly contribution of Mythical Love. R.I.P. to Deadly Nedley. Like it. You're picking up the vibe. This is good. So Tim, welcome. What's your initial feelings on good old Ned Stark?
Well, as someone who watched the show first before I read the books, I was always under the impression I thought Ned was going to be our main character. So when he dies in the penultimate episode of season 1, I did not see it coming, and that's when I was like, "Whoa, okay, anyone can die here." And so then I was like, "Who's our main character here?" And it realized like, "Oh, this is like an ensemble thing." Okay, and it was after that, like it was because it was around. I think it was when I was waiting on season 6 is when I really started reading the books and then got more of an appreciation for Ned than the show gave. And I realized, like, yeah, this is like, as far as dads in Westeros go, he's up there as one of the best ones. But even still, he's got, he's got his problems. He's not perfect, like he said. Like I said to you, like, you're telling a 3-year-old, well, you got to man up. Winter's coming, and it's like, dude, he's 3. What do you really expect from him?
Yeah, and of course, us reading the books had that same experience of like, oh my God, is this really happening? Because something's gonna happen. They're not actually gonna, even when he's up there and the commotion is happening, and all of a sudden it's like, no, they cut his head off. He's dead. And it's like, it definitely, you feel like somebody died, and it sets a tone for the story. And of course, much like Rhaegar being dead, Ned's lack of presence in the story creates room for Robb and Jon and all the other characters who are going to come do their thing. Rhaegar not being there creates space for Dany and Fagon and Jon. So, my name is Fagon. I'm really not real. Sorry, guys, but I've heard some stories. We got into the parentage theories and all this stuff, and I've heard a lot of stories. Ned Dane is actually Aerys and the Shara Dane's kid. I've heard it's Ned and Ashara's kid. Like, I've heard some crazy stuff. Anyways, we'll find out. I think Fagon is a Blackfire. I think that's pretty solid myself. But Ned Stark. Talking about Ned Stark. So Ned, clearly based on Ned Flanders. Now, he is, like you were saying, he is a good dad. And you could even say he's a certain example of positive masculinity, if you want to say. Meaning, like, he's a tough guy. He knows how to lay down law. But obviously, he's a good, nurturing father. A good husband to Kat. Of course, they have an arranged marriage, so it's not even like that started out as a romance. It started out as a very political thing. And they grew to love each other. Obviously, Ned treats her well. And so, yeah, he feels like, I wrote here in my notes, he's written to feel like your dad or the dad you wanted, potentially. He gives the kids puppies, Tim. And he does have that kind of presence. But the thing I wanted to drill in on is, like, if you're not one of his kids and you're not his wife, you have a little different view of him. Okay, it's not the storyteller dad. Oh, by the way, yeah, this guy might have some PTSD, which we'll get into all the reasons for that. But yeah, he's some of the quietness and the sort of withdrawn nature. Like, some of that is he's the quiet wolf. That's his nickname. And some of that is just his nature, and some of that is PTSD for sure. But we'll get to Ned's trauma. Go ahead, though, if you have a thought.
Ned's got that, like, Hank Hill style of parentage. Like, he's sort of conservative, but he's willing to learn. He's open-minded, and it's more about quality of character are the things that mean more to him than anything. Like, he can see the value and the good in people, but he also, like, he's a take no bullshit kind of guy. And that's why, like, when he gets to King's Landing and realizes the truth of, like, oh God, how's he been running the realm? And then you realize, like, yeah, I have, because he closed himself off in the North too. Like, he's also he's an isolationist politically, which is why when he does come down to King's Landing to be the new hand, he's so unprepared for the realities of what's about to hit him, because this is like a very responsible person who just found out, like, oh, everything's fine at home, but elsewhere it's terrible, and I never even knew. I had no idea. And now how do I even fix all of this? You're muted.
What would I do without you, Tim? There's a lot there as far as, and that's what I want to do, is I want to back up and tell the story of his life and get to the point where we meet him in the story. Because we meet him as a 35-year-old. Again, with PTSD and with guilt and, trauma and all this thing in his background. And he's a dad, and he's like you said, he's kind of settled into being an isolationist by then. But there's a reason why when he comes down to King's Landing, everyone acts terrified. When Robert and Ned are back together again, the Lannisters are terrified. Varys and Peter pay Ned a ton of attention when he comes to King's Landing. Everybody knows, like, everything turns on what Ned does once he's there. And there's a reason why he cast that kind of a shadow. So, going back, there's a quote that Varys says about Stannis, where he says, "There's no creature on earth half so terrifying as a truly just man." That could just as easily apply to Ned, who is kind of like Stannis. Like, if Stannis, so both of these guys never laugh, Tim. But Ned will crack like half of a smile, you know, when he sees like his kids fighting in the yard. Like he'll have a little grin. Whereas Stannis will just grind his teeth. But they do come across with a similar energy, do they not?
Yeah, because like if they're afraid of Stannis because Stannis literally would have their heads on pikes. Like if Stannis was Hand of the King, Littlefinger, Varys, Pycelle, they would all be out. And out as in they just be straight up dead. With Ned, Ned's like the second worst thing for them. He might not have them outright execute it, but if once Ned is able to learn the truth, he is someone who would definitely at least have them fired. So that is why he scares them as much as as maybe a little less than Stannis, but for just as much cause because Ned would be the type of person who would remove their cushy way of life that they become accustomed to.
Yeah, Stannis's morality is a little more utilitarian. Like he does have a kind of morality. The way that he talks, he gives the order to geld rapers, for example. It comes quick and easy to him. He's like, no, we don't tolerate that. This is what we do with that. So like, there is a morality behind his sternness, but Ned truly has more of an empathetic moral compass. So he will cut people's heads off, but he's more afraid of like making a mistake. He wants to make sure he's doing the right thing. He gives Cersei a chance to flee to Casterly Rock. You know, like he has mercy in him as well, even though he will cut some people's heads off. Or Stannis is like, well, sometimes people get their heads cut off, and sometimes I have to do it. You know?
Yes, Stannis has got like that kind of Punisher vibe to him in the vigilante style justice, whereas Ned is more of the no, the law needs to be the law and the law needs to play out style thing.
Yeah, Ned is. He's actually not Judge Dredd. That's just he kind of is because he is an executioner, but yeah, the vibe is not the same.
Yeah, Stannis would actually be more the Judge Dredd.
Now I'm thinking of Ned Bean as instead of Stallone as Judge Dredd. He's like, well, let's talk about this first.
You betrayed the law.
So
yeah, but the problem with that mentality though is that the wheels of justice turn slow. Like bureaucracy is a grind.
And that's good because you don't want the government to swiftly execute people. Like you want that to take time if it happens at all. Like we don't. There's a reason why is similarly like with democracy, they're designed so that you can't radically change everything real quick. Like that's what happens in a dictatorship. So yeah, Ned is definitely dead. That is true. He is one character that everyone is sure is dead. There's no secret Ned's alive theories. So we don't have to worry about that today. But so like I said, when he gets to King's Landing, Varys and Peter Baelish, the two plotters, are paying Ned tons of attention. They're all over him, in his ear, monitoring what he does, trying to give him advice and steer the direction of where things are going the whole way. You know, when he's in his cell, Varys is visiting him. Peter Baelish with the book and then the gold cloak deception, all of it. Now, another thing is like, you remember that fight in King's Landing where Jaime and Ned get into it, right? Jaime ambushes Ned's men. Basically, it's Ned and Jory and one other person or two other people and Peter Baelish. And Jaime shows up with like 12 or 17 people or something. And what happens is Jaime kills Jory. Then he withdraws and tells his men to kill Ned's other men, but not to harm Ned. The thing to notice is that Jaime doesn't want any piece of Ned. Even though Jaime is probably a better swordsman, he does not fight him. He does not. He backs up and lets his men do the dirty work. It's like, yeah, maybe in a clean tourney, Jaime wins that sword fight, but in the streets, that's Ned Stark. You know what I mean? You don't just like you don't just get into a fight with that guy. So I was thinking about that more. I was like, yeah, Jaime actually didn't want a piece there.
Mm-hmm. No, Ned will definitely throw hands. Like he's shown that.
Because, of course, this is the guy who killed Arthur Dayne. Nobody knows how it happened. People just know that Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, Ned, his men, Howland Reed, these people all got into a fight, and it's Ned and Howland that walked out, and everyone else died. So, like, you just have to understand, like, the shadow that this guy casts. And as far as Robert, the second that John Arryn dies, Robert comes running to the north, be like, Ned, come protect me. Okay? Like, even though Robert is actually a year older than Ned, Ned is kind of the big brother in that relationship. And I got a whole section about Ned and Robert that we'll get into. But first, I just want to finish outlining why everyone is terrified of Ned. And there was a super chat a minute ago. And a PayPal, by the way. Thank you, Hazy Dave. I didn't say your name. And no Sage. Winter is come diddly humming. Oh, that's for the Ned Flint. Varamir, Six Skins. I think Eddard is a pretty cool dude. Cuts heads off and is not afraid of anything.
Oh, that's old meme is old, but it's an old meme, but it checks out.
It's an old meme, but it checks out. That's great. I love that. Okay, so
there's one I wanted to grab though. Petey McCook says, like, does the respect for Ned mostly come from the belief that Ned defeated Arthur Dayne? Now, I would say no. Like, there's like maybe a respect for his fighting prowess,
but it's a lot more than that.
No, it's the fact that Ned is a genuinely good person. Not perfect, but he tries. In the north, he visits with the mountain clans, which is something that we get the impression that not all lords of Winterfell are doing it, but Ned took the time to meet with all of his vassals, no matter how great or small or how small the northern house was. That is why the northern mountain clans respect him, and they call him the Ned, and they're so ready to go to arms for what they believe is his daughter. As for in King's Landing, well, we see when that, I don't think he was named, but the Pesnu comes forward and talks about the burning in the Riverlands. When Tywin Lannister unleashes the mountain and the mountain's men, Ned stands up and says, like, I denounce him, I remove all lands and titles, all that. Like, Ned is willing to sit and hear from everyone, no matter lord, great or small, and even the common folk. He allows them to approach him, give them their grievances, and he does his best to hear them out and try to help them with their problems. And I do believe that is why Ned has such a profound respect, because he does his best to help as many people as he can, no matter their station.
Arthur Dayne, for the last time, and I'm not actually mad about this, but he was not wearing Rhaegar's armor on the damn trident. Rhaegar's dead. Arthur's dead. Please stop. I mean, you can keep it up. Again, I'm not actually mad. I'm just trying to be entertaining. But I swear to God, that's not the story. It's not. Anyway. Yes. And the point is of Ned's reputation, even if Arthur is secretly alive somewhere, everyone thinks Ned killed him. So we shall leave.
Even though we don't know the truth of it. I mean, I think it was probably Howland Reed blow dart in the back that allowed Ned to get the one up on him. But
it could have been.
That's how Crannog can fight, baby.
That's my choice. Some people think maybe it was like Arthur Dayne honorable self-sacrifice after they worked out what needed to be kept secret or something like that. I mean, who knows what actually happened? But I'm pretty sure he's dead. And according to everyone in Westeros, this is what they know. Ned and Howland walked away from the Tower of Joy. Arthur Dayne, the deadliest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, did not. So that's the point. The reputation. We'll get into some of the Tower of Joy and the war stuff in more detail. But so Ned and Robert were 19 when the rebellion happened. They're basically like young barbarian warlords. They're both throwbacks, very much so. And Ned, you have to remember, bad at Southern politics. He does Northern politics. It's different. And in that sense, again, these are throwbacks. I went over the War of the Five Kings, and we're going to go through it. But it's basically Ned and Robert. Almost single-handedly, those two guys are winning this war. They're 19 years old. They overthrew the Targaryen dynasty. Okay? Lord Burrell, in the chapter we read recently, he says about Robert after his first victory at Goldtown, this Baratheon is fearless. He fights the way a king should fight. So this is a certain sort of admiration, but this is the admiration for a warlord king, somebody who climbs the walls first and kills the other lord with his hammer, as he did to Mark Grafton at Goldtown. So that's the kind of respect that Robert commands. Ned is the same. Okay. These were the top two guys at the Trident that turned that battle. And then again, we talked about the Arthur Dayne, the Tower of Joy thing. Then 7 years later, the Greyjoys rear their ugly kraken head. And what happens, Tim?
Oh, they smash that in like a day. It does not take long to put down the Greyjoy Rebellion at all. Like, that thing was pretty much doomed from the start. And that is a testament to Robert, because Robert was still a relatively new king, only a few years into his reign, but Balon Greyjoy is like, well, I'm going to test the waters here. He's not a dragon, even though Aerys really wasn't either, being how mad he was. He was a dragon in the sense that he just burned everyone, but that's just him being mad with power. So he tests out Robert, but then Robert's actually excited about it because he's like, "Oh, great! I've been so bored." It's the thing that really rouses him, and that's the thing, because Robert is a warrior king, but he's presiding over a relatively long time of peace. Aside from that one hiccup, he's like Maekar in that respect. Mute.
I'm bad today. And we'll definitely talk about Robert more. Again, their dynamic and all that. But yes, to your point, they smashed the Greyjoy Rebellion down forcefully. And we should appreciate, like, to make a sports analogy, like, this is very much a road game. This is, I mean, the Ironborn are no picnic to fight. And you're fighting them on the Iron Islands in their home turf. They can defend their islands with their boats. They get to defend castles, defend the high ground. Robert and company have to smash through the wall and take the castle of Pike, which they do. Like, we should stop and appreciate. It's a hella road game. That's their turf, and they came and just smashed them. So this is where, you remember that scene in the first season where Ned and Robert are on the way south and they're having their little picnic, right? And and they're talking about, oh, Dany's wed Khal Drogo. What if the Dothraki invade? And Ned very casually is just like, well, if the Dothraki invade, we'll throw them back into the sea, like whatever. And this is where that comes from. This is why they talk like that. They overthrew the Targaryens, and then they smashed the Greyjoys on the Iron Islands. Like, they're pretty much like, yeah, bring it on. Who are you going to throw at us? Like, we'll take it. We can handle it. Like, you have to understand that confidence comes from the experience of having basically kicked everyone's ass anytime they've taken the field.
Exactly, because, like you said, they took down a dynasty. So the idea of some horse lords who have never sailed before all of a sudden crossing the narrow sea into completely unfamiliar territory to them, it'd be like, hey, we what are they gonna do? Like, the fact that they're even, like, it's a long shot that they'll even sail over here, because that's something they've never done. Like, the whole experience to them would be new. Like, granted, the Dothraki are great warriors, but the idea of them crossing the sea to fight in Westeros is a completely alien concept to them. They probably, like, as great of fighters as they are, they're really not going to know what it is they're even doing when they get over here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a part where Jorah, I think it's the third book, he reflects on his initial conclusion that the Dothraki wouldn't fare well in Westeros against the castles. And he sort of goes back on that. He's like, I'm not so sure, actually. I think that's from the books and not the show. But I do think you could get into, like, the Mongols had no problems with castles. Now, they brought sappers and They had some engineer, like the Mongols loved engineering, and they collected war engineering from all the people that they conquered, including the Chinese and Arabs and all kinds of people that had various technologies. However, the idea that the Dothraki would not, the Westerosi lords could just hold up in their castles and be fine, like that's not true. There's more to that discussion. However, the point is, Ned speaks like that. He carries that big stick because they've whooped everybody. So you should understand, like, that's not just idle talk. Like, Ned's 35. Robert obviously is much is made of how he's gained weight and he's not who he used to be and all that. But still, like, 35 is not over the hill. Robert could take a couple of, he could get on the treadmill for a couple of weeks, Tim, drop a few pounds and be ready for some action, I bet. And obviously, the war isn't actually on just two people, but these are the leaders. Like, if Ned and Robert got their shit together and marshaled the armies of Westeros, those are capable generals, and all their experience in Robert's Rebellion and the Greyjoy Rebellion, whatever they'd lost in physical capabilities at this point, they would have gained in experience. So these are people that men would follow and fight for and would have led a pretty solid defense of Westeros. But again, sliding doors, this is a reality that never came to be.
In the show, that's actually a conversation that comes up between Robert and Cersei, where Robert realistically looks at the Dothraki invading, and he comes to the conclusion, like, yeah, we can hold ourselves up in our castles, that'll work well. But he comes to the conclusion that if they did that, the Dothraki would turn their attention towards the people. And then he's like, what are the common folk going to think when they see their king and their lords hiding?
Yeah.
So Robert comes to the conclusion, like, if the Dothraki were to invade, they would have to be very forthcoming with a response because of that, because the Dothraki will rape and pillage the common folk, and then it'll be the common folk who are the ones, like, bringing down the lords for not protecting them. It would completely be breaking the feudal contract to just hole up in his castle and let the Dothraki run around.
Yes. So, for example, let's think about the way that Dany and Jorah and Barristan talk about invading Westeros based on, like, after Robert dies, everything changes. Ned and Robert are both dead, and Jorah's like, wow, this is totally fucking different then. Like, and they get to talking about Cersei, Tyrion telling Fagon about, Cersei, she's jealous, she's this, she's paranoid, she's delusional, and then on top of that, she's vain and cruel, and all. It's the great Tyrion monologue about Cersei. And basically, like, Cersei is no Ned Stark. Like, when people are looking at, this is just predator stuff. A predator assesses a prey animal. It's like, do they look weak or do they look strong? They pick off the weak members of the flock. They assess the guardians of the den and say, can we overrun them? Are they well fed? Are they malnourished? And it's like, yeah, when you look at Westeros and you see Robert and Ned, it's like, okay, I really don't want to mess with that. But then those guys die, and now Cersei's in charge, and other people like Kevin Lannister and Peter Baelish and people that nobody's afraid of, and it's like, yeah, the gates are wide open. And then Fagon invades in the Stormlands. They've already taken several castles, and in King's Landing, they're just going, did you hear about, is there something weird going on at, like, Griffin's Roost or something? I don't know, something about a guy with red hair. You know what I mean? Like, they're totally asleep at the wheel. Whereas Robert, not good at managing financial policy, the first whiff he would have heard of people landing in the Storm's End, he would have been like, I'll get my hammer. He's like, finally, someone to hit. All right, a foe I can sink my hammer into. So, yeah, it's the reputation is the point. Ned and Robert both have this barbarian warlord reputation, and that's for a reason.
Yeah. And that's this, like, going back to the line from Lord Burrell of, like, oh, this is a king. And that is, like, when Robert shows up on the battlefield and people see him, it probably was like a breath of fresh air for some people who had, especially those who were already fed up with the Targaryens, and especially after Aerys shows up at the tourney at Harrenhal and everyone sees him and they're like, Look at him. Look at he's gangly. His fingernail, like he's not clipping his fingernails. He's not cutting his hair. He looks like he pooped himself. Like this is our king. And then even people who liked Rhaegar, there's still going to be those who look at Rhaegar and they're like, oh, pretty boy. So for those who have this view of like, no, a king should be a warrior, gruff, masculine. Robert, they do look at Robert and they say like that is what a king looks like. The same way when Robert and the baggage train arrive in Winterfell, they look at Jaime. They see Robert, how fat he's gotten, and they look at Jaime and they think like, no, Jaime should be the king. And it's like, yeah, because you're not seeing Robert when he was in his prime. You're seeing Robert after the years of eating and drinking and letting himself go.
Just real quickly, I take issue with saying that Sansa snitched. Okay, I know what you're talking about. And yes, she went to Cersei and blabbed about them leaving town. However, the problem with calling that a snitching is, one, that's on Ned to manage that situation. He managed it very poorly. Given it's like they've told Sansa that she's going to marry Joffrey, and they've got her all worked up about it, and then suddenly they're yanking it away from her and not letting her say goodbye. It's like, what do you think a 12-year-old girl is going to do? She's acting like a 12-year-old girl. So it's not only that, but that is not the sole reason that Ned's plans fell apart. Like, Ned's plans fell apart because he trusted Peter Baelish, and Peter Baelish is like, oh yeah, I've got the watch on your side. And then he stepped into the throne room, and Peter was like, psych. That's why, you know what I mean? Like, Ned lost because he's naive at politics. So, yeah, let's not blame 11 or 12-year-old Sansa. Is very much acting like a 12-year-old girl there. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
I said because I don't want to curse too much. I'm trying to fall back on that so that Dave's not getting demonetized right away because of my potty mouth.
Yeah, a couple of them seem to be okay, but
yeah. Not the way I talk. I gotta rear myself in because I have a sailor mouth and I know it.
Yeah, and honestly, yeah, I don't like. You have to blame the adults in the room first. Like, as much as we talk about Rhaenyra and Alicent, when we unravel the whole dance, it's like you have to talk about Viserys and Otto first. Like, these guys set the stage that other people were then stepped into, and were like, "Oh, cool, it's a giant mess. I'll try to find my way through that somehow." Anyway, not really the main subject of the thing, but I just want to defend Sansa a little bit there. So, real quick, Michael sent in a PayPal, said, reading Rhaegar shirts when? Good note. I'll mention that to Maynard Plum and Atlantis Morissette, our t-shirt artist. Potential t-shirt artist. Got to get back in the loop with that. Sorry, I just have so much ADHD, guys. There's just a lot of things. We're getting to them one by one. Like the podcast feed, and the podcast feed is super updated. Anyway, he's asking post Tower of Joy logistics, Ned would need a nurse for Jon, and Ashara needs to disappear. So if Ashara went to the Neck to hide out with Howland Reed, maybe she traveled north with Ned and posed as Willa on the road, if you will. This is an interesting theory. I hadn't thought about that. But mostly we'll just have to see about that Tower of Joy stuff. Okay, so last part about Ned and his reputation and the fear of Ned and the way people act when he comes down to King's Landing. It's like part of his archetype is that of an executioner, the warden of the North, like prison warden. He's he's the warden of the Night's Watch. He's the warden of the Wildlings. He's the warden of people like Jorah, who might try to break the law. All these people go in fear of Ned. And like I said, he kills the people himself. So it's very personal. He doesn't use an executioner. He shows up to Bear Island, knocks on the door, and he's like, yeah, I have to behead you now because you're a slaver. Or send you to the Watch, one or the other. Like, it would have been up to him to decide. But, like, that's Ned Stark. He shows up himself. And Jorah had to flee to Essos in order to escape that. Like he had to leave the continent. Okay. And of course, later when he's, hears a rumor about Ned being a traitor to Robert, the quote is, "Ned Stark, a traitor, not bloody likely. The long summer will come again before that one would besmirch his precious honor." So, of course, Jorah is taking a cynical view of Ned's honor. Oh, it's just this stiff, artificial thing. We're going to get into Ned's honor. It's actually a real thing. That's something that Jorah's missing. But the point is, Ned's reputation, it even goes beyond the wall. Even the wildlings know of his reputation. So, like this, Ned as a just man and as someone who will lay down the law of justice, everyone knows it. Like, from the Frostfangs to Dorne, right?
Yeah, because when it comes to Ned's character, like the only blotch on it that anyone's ever able to note is, oh, he fathered a bastard. But then we as the reader know that's not even true. He's really his uncle, and this is something he took on to protect his nephew. So it's like even the one little bit of dirt that can be held against him isn't even actually there. I guess, like, it really, if anything, Ned's biggest fault was condemning Jaime the moment he walked into the throne room. And it is kind of thing because Jaime kills the Mad King. And the thing is, he kills the man that Ned was fighting against. So it is a bit hypocritical that Ned's like, oh, you killed your king. And Jaime has to look at him like, dude, weren't you coming in here to just do that very same thing? I did your job for you.
So,
and that kind of, yeah. Again, because no one's perfect. No one's perfect.
Well, okay, so there's definitely a few things we can criticize Ned for, not just that. But
okay.
I was thinking about, the thing about Ned's mistakes is they're one of, like, judgment. It's never a moral mistake. So, on one sense, like, yes, he is on a pedestal because this is a guy who does the right thing even when no one is looking, which is the true test of that, okay? However, he does make mistakes, which we can criticize him for because this is politics. Strategy is part of it. So the thing about the throne room thing with Jaime is it's not just that moment. I went back and read through the War of the Five Kings, and there's several things that happen leading up to that moment. So we'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to that. It is a very complex moment for everyone involved. And I didn't get it at first when I read the story, but now I think I do. So I've got the timeline of the War of the Five Kings here embedded in Ned's life events. The War of the Robert's Rebellion. Robert's Rebellion, yeah. There are some parallels.
Yeah, War of the Five Kings, it's Ned's death that pretty much causes Five Kings War.
Yes, that's true.
One of the big reasons behind it.
So, Jorah is not a bad person. Jorah is absolutely a bad person. Jorah is a slaver, first of all, and he's a slaver who does that in contradiction to the laws of his land. So he's not even, like, in Meereen, they're slavers, like, it's their culture. Jorah is a slaver in a land where that's illegal.
Yeah.
Then he creeps on Dany and is simultaneously selling out Dany while he's perving on her and trying to manipulate. Like, dude, Jorah is absolutely, he's got some issues. I mean, bad person is a little black and white, but, like, it's not a good person either.
And even that, the thing that got him in trouble, he sells men into slavery to get money to keep his gold-digging wife happy. Like, that's Jorah's character.
Yeah. So, he's pretty bad. I think Ian Glenn really is what gave us a different view. Like, he's much more noble in the show. He's still exposed as having sold information to Dany, but he really, like, he comes across a little differently on the show than the books because of Ian Glenn. However, we shouldn't lose sight. Like, yeah. No, not at the end. I mean, well, we're mostly talking about the book reality here, not the show reality, because that show ending doesn't have anything to do with how the books are going to end. So, life. Let's real quickly catch up on Ned's childhood, and then we'll get into the Robert's Rebellion stuff. So he's born in 263 AC, and thank you, chat, for the takes. It's shaking loose the discussion. So thanks for coming here and giving your opinions. Him kissing a 14-year-old, is it too much? Yeah, it was. It was. You didn't ask either, or obtain any visual cues that it was welcome. Because I know people don't like, can I kiss you now? Like, usually there's give each other the sign that's welcome. Anyway.
I'm reading the comments saying, give Jorah a break. He was just simping. Because simping ain't easy.
Simping ain't easy.
Trying to keep that high tower happy.
A hapless romantic. I don't, that's, again, remember, was also informing on Daenerys for a chance to return to King's Landing right up until even in Karth. Like there's a reason why he knew the wine cellar was selling her poisoned wine. Remember, he's supposed to be like a very flawed character that's caught in some contradictions. Like, yeah, he has genuine affection for Dany. I think he does come to believe in Dany as potentially a good ruler. But at first, he's not really taking her seriously. He's just using the situation for his advantage. So it's definitely conflicty, but yeah, I can't make too many excuses for the guy. I mean, again, he sold people into slavery, like Tim said, just to maintain his lifestyle. And that's the first thing that we know about him. It's not good.
There's a hopeless romantic, and then there's just being hopeless. Bouncing Souls got to rep that East Coast pump scene.
Yeah, so Ned Stark, born in 263 AC, second of 4. So Brandon, Ned, Lyanna, Benjen. At the age of 8, he's fostered at the Eyrie with Jon Arryn. And of course, Robert Baratheon at the same time also fostered at the Eyrie. So Jon Arryn becomes like a second father to him. Robert becomes like a brother. And we'll get to the Ned Robert thing, but Ned is kind of like Stannis. Robert is kind of like Brandon. So Ned and Robert remind each other of each other's brothers. And thus, there's an easy dynamic there that they can slide into. Even though it's not exactly the same, it is, you can see the parallel there. So,
well, it's because Ned's a more likable Stannis.
He is. Yeah. And Robert is, at first, appears to be a more coachable Brandon. Because I think Ned perhaps wanted to counsel Brandon and, or at least would have disagreed with the way that Brandon conducted himself, but wasn't in a position to give him any counsel. And then he ends up dead. So I think Ned, upon reflecting on that, we'll get into it. But
I think, Ned's got that like total middle child syndrome that people get.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll talk about the Brandon thing as well. Different kind of glam. Been binge watching your vids. Thank you. On my work commute, it makes the drive go by so much faster and more enjoyable. Yeah, thanks to everyone watching the videos for a long time. YouTube has recently started recommending more of my live streams to people because the average watch time has really gotten up there. Some of them have an average watch time of like an hour, which is just really flattering. So I really appreciate you guys re-listening late at night and all that stuff. And again, appreciate you guys that come to the streams, because the more people come to the streams, the more views it starts out with. And that makes a big difference as to whether or not YouTube recommends it or not. So if a lot of people come to the stream, the video has a much better chance of like taking off in the long run. So thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all. But yes, at 8, fostered at the Eyrie. By the age of 16, Ned is splitting time between the Vale and Winterfell. A little bit of back and forth. And it's on one of those trips that he carried, the proposal from House Baratheon for Robert to wed Lyanna. Then at 18, we get the tourney at Harrenhal. And Ned was in the Vale with Robert at the time. So Ned and Robert come from the Eyrie to Harrenhal for the tourney and then go back. So then the next year when Robert's Rebellion starts, Lyanna is abducted, and then Brandon goes to King's Landing. Ned is again at the Eyrie when this happens. And after Aerys kills horribly Brandon and Rickard, he of course calls for Robert's head in the Vale, and that's when Jon Arryn calls his banners. So let me give you this little map here. This is Robert's rebellion. There's one battle that's not on here, but there's basically 7 battles.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Cheryl Baxter, why did Ned and Robert have to go and live with Jon Arryn? Great question. The reason why is because they were organizing to overthrow Aerys. Rickard Stark, Hoster Tully, probably whoever Robert's father was, Sir Steffan, before he died.
Stefan, yeah.
They were all making these arrangements, and Jon Arryn would be the other one, and then sort of Tywin on the side. They're making these wedding arrangements and fosterings to build an alliance that can overthrow Aerys. So that's essentially why Lyanna and Robert were betrothed, why Ned was in the Vale, why Brandon and Cat were betrothed, and potentially they were talking about Jaime and Lysa at a certain point. And that's again, we're building an alliance to overthrow Aerys. So that's why. So the first thing, go ahead.
I was going to say, because it starts with Rickard Stark, Ned's father, getting involved in these Southern ambitions. Because the North has always been kind of always on its own, this isolationist thing, but Rickard, and it starts poking his nose into that. And we're told by like Lady Barbary Dustin, well, that's because of the gray rats, the maesters are prodding him on. But there just seems to be a general interest by Rickard in becoming more involved in the politics of the realm, which is why he starts fostering relations with the Tullys, with the Baratheons, with the Arryns. And then, like I said, yeah, and so it's a great start because you already have, that's 4 kingdoms right there. You got the North, the Vale, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands. And then, yeah, Tywin Lannister, potential Lysa Tully, Jaime Lannister relationship, that brings the Westerlands into the fold. And then even the idea of Ned and Ashara Dane is probably something that Rickard Stark would have been very happy to have done, because the Martells are already married into the crown, but by getting House Dane, that brings Dorne into the fold. And then if things actually go down the way they're prepping for, it means that the Dornish, who might be split on the matter, do I side with the Martells or do I not like the Targaryens either? House Dane becomes a good rallying point for them, and that splits Dornish support. So politically wise, like Rickard making all of these arrangements for his children, all these different political marriages, really works in his favor and the favor of the Baratheons and the Arryns and everyone else he was making deals with.
Exactly. So they're making these preparations. They're trying to build these alliances. But what happens is everything blows up before they're ready to really spring their plans, because Rhaegar and Lyanna run off, and Brandon gets the idea, probably from Peter Baelish. Again, shout out to Indie Geek for his video on that. And then runs to King's Landing and demands to fight Rhaegar. And then Aerys takes him prisoner. And then Rickard comes with 200 soldiers to King's Landing, which seems like a decent amount of soldiers, but he still ends up executed by Aerys along with his son. So now he calls for the head of Robert Baratheon in the Vale, and Jon Arryn, one of the key plotters, is like, Rickard is dead. It's like, well, shit, we got to go forward with our plan now. We don't have any more time to wait. Like, we have to choose now, because he's calling for Robert's head. And so here's what happens. Ned Stark goes north, and he crosses the fingers. The problem is that Goldtown is loyal to the crown, okay? Goldtown is the major port in the Vale, loyal to the crown. Goldtown, very rich, very wealthy, they let King's Landing centric, So what happens is Ned goes north because he needs to go home and call his banners, get his northern troops south. That takes a while. We got to start that as soon as possible. So this is where that story comes where, a fisherman and his daughter are trying to take him to White Harbor, and there's a storm. Their fisherman dies. His daughter gets him to the Three Sisters, and Lord Burrell allows him to continue on. And then he's able to get home and call his banners. John Arryn and Robert go south to Goldtown to take it. And the Lord of Goldtown is Mark Grafton. And Robert, first over the wall, slays Mark Grafton in single combat on the wall where everyone can see and gets this reputation. And that's what Burrell is talking about. By the time Ned gets to the sisters, Goldtown has happened already. Lord Burrell's heard about it. And he's like, this Baratheon fights like a king should. He's talking about Goldtown. So this is the beginning of Robert's reputation, really, is at Goldtown. And it's this first battle. So from there, on the map, we go to number 1. Go to number 6. Number 6 is Storm's End. So Robert, after Goldtown, because he's trying to get to Storm's End to call his banners, which he does. So then they go to number 1. That is Summerhall. Robert wins his first battle at Summerhall. And so they advance to number 2, which is Ashford Meadow, same place that Dunk had that tourney. Now at Ashford, whole bunch of Tyrells show up. Too many. And Robert loses, but not, his troops aren't wiped out, but there are too many Tyrells. He has to retreat from the field. And so he goes north, and you see that arrow going all the way up to number 3. That's the Battle of the Bells at Stony Sept. Okay, so let me catch my breath. Hang on. So at Stony Sept, Robert fights 3 battles in one day. That's the famous story of it. And the thing is, he says later that it's Ned who won the battle for him because Hoster Tully and Ned Stark show up at the end of the day and find him. And this is the one where John Connington is searching for him, right? And Robert's hiding in the town, and John could have burned this town and killed everyone, but he didn't. And then Ned and Hoster show up and win. So this is a Ned victory here as well as a Robert victory. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's just like the Battle of the Bells is when he gives John Con the slip. And what's unfortunate for John Con is he loses the battle because he refuses to be like Tywin and refuses to use scorched earth tactics and just burn and kill everyone at random. And that's the thing. Like, it's because John Con had that sense of honor to not be a war criminal that causes him to lose. And now it's unfortunate because now it's what causes him to question that and in his goals with Fagon to be like, well, I'm not going to do that. And that's why it opens such the opportunity that the burning of King's Landing might be first instigated by John Con and then made worse by Dany if she hits like some wildfire caches.
You know what John Con is missing, though? He's looking at Tywin's example and missing Robert's example. He's like, but if you are a morally upright person who protects the people and is seen as the people's champion, they'll hide you in their basement from your enemies.
Yep.
And
because they smuggled him.
Same thing with Ned. It's like, Ned, he loses, he's killed, whatever. But 2 years later, mountain clans in the north are like, for the Ned's daughter. You know what I mean? Like, it matters when you stand for something.
And Ned's also smuggled his from the Vale to the Three Sisters, trying to get back to the north. Like, he's got people hiding him, protecting him, and giving him a lift, giving him rides to get him where he needs to go. And it's because of their quality of character, the fact that people look up to them and respect them, that they're willing to stick their necks out for them like that.
So after the Battle of the Bells, number 3, this is the interesting part. You see number 4, that's the Battle of the Trident. But in between that, they go to Riverrun and do some weddings. And Riverrun's not far from there, but they run to Riverrun, and that's where Ned marries Kat and John Arryn marries Lysa. And they do this to firm up the alliances before they go for the rest of the war. So it's really important. And it reminds you of Robb going to the Twins to sort things out with the Freys. And instead we're going to do the marriage of Edmure and Rosalind Frey instead of Robb and a Frey woman. But the point is, like, even in the middle of the war, sometimes you got to go do a wedding because a betrodal's not the same as a wedding. The wedding is sacred. Once you're married, like, that alliance is now sewn up. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing here, where they run to River Run, they do the double wedding, and then they go to the Trident. And at the Trident, your three generals are Robert, Ned, and Hoster Tully, more or less. And that's the decisive battle of the war. We don't know what Ned does at the battle, but they win. And then Robert, being injured from his battle with Rhaegar, because Rhaegar didn't go out like a total chump, you know, he put a couple licks on. It's Ned who pursues the Targaryen forces all the way back to King's Landing. So Ned is a big part of this war at this point, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. When he gets to King's Landing, Tim, here's what he finds. Lannister banners flying over the city. Tywin Lannister has sacked the city cruelly. People have been raped and killed in the streets. Really ugly show. And they took the city through treachery, through Varys and Jaime, essentially. Then,
And
on top of that, Rhaella has been killed. Her children have been brutally killed. The little girl supposedly raped by the Mountain too. I don't know if that's something people just throw in, but whatever. It's horror, absolute horror. So Ned shows up and finds Jaime on the throne. After that, finds all this bloodshed, the city sacked. He is upset that Robert's rebellion has now been tarnished and associated with this kind of stuff, which is way below the bar for Ned. And then, after he stares down Jaime and forces him off the throne, Robert shows up and laughs about it. And that's where Ned and Robert get into this huge fight, because Ned is outraged about it and Robert isn't. Elia, not Rhaella. Yes, thank you. Elia and her children. Rhaella's on Dragonstone, giving birth to Dany in the middle of a storm. For 100% certainty, that's what was happening there. Dany. Rhaella, Dany's mother. For sure. Dany, born on Dragonstone. Anyway,
yeah,
yes, thank you. It was Elia and her kids were killed in the Red Keep. So, basically, yeah, it's not just Jaime sitting on the throne. Jaime sitting on the throne was the last part of that. So that's kind of why. Yeah. There's an interesting quote from Cersei, though, where she's like, my brother told me, you know, how you found him on the throne and forced him off. Like, you should have sat on the throne then. And Ned says, I've made a lot of mistakes, but that wasn't one of them. But you do have to wonder. Like, they left Robert to sit the throne. He wasn't an ideal king either. They're really, when you look at Ned and John and Robert, like, really none of them were cut out to be a king in King's Landing, were they?
Oh, absolutely not. Like, Ned shows that in his role as Hand, 17 years later when Robert comes to calling. Like, he's not built for this. Like you just said, like, when he gets to King's Landing and he sees how Tywin has taken the city through treachery, like, he's disgusted. And it's not to say like the North is some podunk place where treachery doesn't happen, because Ned's surely dealing with the Boltons and everything back at home, but it isn't something that comes as naturally to him. The idea that you can just be so underhanded like that, like it's, and treat it like it's nothing, like, oh, just another day, war is war. Like, Ned's like, no, there's still some kind of honor and duty in this, and that's just not something he sees from Tywin. That's like the real reality that sets in of, like, this is how some people are. This is how this, Game of Thrones works.
Yes, and yeah, I think I forgot to mute myself. But did those coughs come through?
The coughs did come through.
Well, apologies, but yeah, that was a full bowl. That was. Praise God. Okay, so what we're talking about.
Ned, John, Aaron, and Robert all not being good
Yeah.
king candidates.
And it's the famous French Revolution question of what comes after. Like, yeah, it's all great to topple an unjust rule, an unjust monarchy, but equally important, what are we doing next? Now, there's a reason it's tough for me to put too much of this on Ned because, again, the guy's 18. He was a second born. He wasn't even supposed to be the lord of the house. His father and brother die, and then he's in the middle of a war. So not only is he taking over his house suddenly and having to step into a marriage he wasn't prepared for, he's also now in the middle of a rebellion he didn't start. So, like, he stepped up to the plate for all of that stuff. And the only place he fell short was, like, figuring out, like, who should be king and being okay with leaving Robert and John to sit on the throne. Even though, like, that's not the greatest, not really the ideal candidates. Like, they needed, I don't know, they needed Renly or Stannis or, I don't even know who it would have been.
Yeah, and you got to top it off. His sister just died, giving birth to a child whose father, his best friend's family his best friend just murdered, and whose family the Lannisters have killed, and who he now sees his best friend seeing the corpses of two children and smiling about it.
I think Barris Aurelius is right. There should have been another great council at this point. That's probably true. They even could have discussed transitioning to something that wasn't a monarchy. I mean, anything was on the table. 300 years of Targaryen rule had been overthrown, and they didn't have dragons anymore. So, yeah, that probably would have been a good call. But, so just to finish off this war here, they go up to number 4. That's the Battle of the Trident. They come back to King's Landing. They find it as it is. Ned and Robert get into this fight over the morality of what the Lannisters have done. Then Ned goes to Storm's End to lift the siege. How nice of, like, oh, I'll go lift the siege of your home castle and your brother while you go ahead and sit on the throne here. So Ned does that. That's bloodless because essentially, Mace Tyrell is just sitting there having a siege. And Ned shows up. He's like, hey, war's over. And Mace Tyrell is not Arthur Dayne. And he is not about to die for a dead-end cause. And he's just like, oh, the war's over? Okay, I'm not in trouble. I can still be Lord of Highgarden? Sweet. No, I'm out. Go ahead. Feel free.
And this is the thing, too, because like Ned has to look at Robert and be like, look, I know you don't like your brothers, but they're surviving on rats and shoe leather, so I'm going to go free them up right now.
And then from number 6... Ned then goes to the Tower of Joy and has the Tower of Joy. And Lyanna dies, obviously. After that is when Ned and Robert are reconciled. And Ned takes Dawn to Starfall and goes back to King's Landing and goes home and whatever. So that's the war, just so everyone has that in their mind. And we just went through some of this here. So, first thing, pressure reveals character. Power reveals character too, but pressure maybe is even better for showing you what somebody's got. And like we said, Ned wasn't chosen for this. He thinks about that sometimes. Maybe even say he has a mild inferiority complex to his brother Brandon. However, he stepped up to the plate. I mean, he could have been the Stark that lost the North. That moment when Brandon and Rickard had been killed, and him and John and Aaron and Robert got the letter from Aerys demanding Robert's head. Like, just put yourself in Ned's shoes as an 18-year-old and just think about that. The king has just killed your father and brother and wants you. Like, damn, dude, that's heavy. So maybe this is why Ned is so serious and he takes everything so duty and honor so seriously. Like, he was forced to grow up. He had to kill the boy and let the man be born, if you will, when he was 18 in a big way. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
Yeah, because like he's thrown in a position that he never saw for himself. He never expected to be Lord of Winterfell, and I'm sure he never expected himself to be leading armies in a coup that actually succeeds in the overthrow of a 300-year dynasty. Like, he probably, at such a young age, he's looking at it like, I can't believe this worked. Like, it worked. Now, but then that's the question. But then tomorrow comes, and what do you do? Like, I don't know. I didn't think I'd ever get this far. Like, that kind of tends to be the thing.
Ned's he's the new Lord of Winterfell now. He's got to go home and take care of the entire North. And he's like, okay, well, you and Jon Arryn have this, and I'll go home and do my thing. And then again, when the Greyjoys reared their ugly kraken heads, all 7 of them, it was 7 years later, Ned showed up, and him and Robert took care of business. And then Ned took Theon home, which is a whole thing. I've got a quote about Theon. Let's see. Oh, I thought I put it in here. There's something about Ned had never, is it Theon's inner monologue? And he's like, Ned had never treated him poorly, but the shadow of his long steel greatsword was always between them, because he knew that the day could come when Ned would have to put him to death. So this is the thing about Theon. Like, he's not treated like a captive. And that's to Ned's credit. It's not Theon's fault as a 10-year-old boy. And Ned treats him like a 10-year-old boy, raises him as part of the household, like a weird cousin or something. That's because Ned's kind. However, the whole point of Ned having Theon is that if Balon rises in rebellion again, Ned might have to cut Theon's head off, and is prepared to do that. Somebody that he's raised. So, like, that's Ned Stark. He took that on. That's pretty heavy. Here, take this 9-year-old boy, raise him in your house, but remember, you might have to kill him. Have fun with that. Right?
Yeah, and then for you to be, and then you're that 9-year-old boy, and like, I'm only here to keep my dad in line. Like, how are you supposed to ever feel accepted? And that's the thing too. Like, it's such a tragedy for Theon, because he grows up and he becomes close with Jon and Robb, but there's always that sinking feeling in the back of his mind of, I'm not really one of them. And it's hard to tell, is this friendship genuine or not? Because I'm here to keep my dad in line, because their dad might have to kill me. Are these guys really my brothers? Are they really my friends? It's hard to know. And that's what makes it so tragic. The fact that it was, for Robb and Jon and Theon, it was genuine. But there's all just that air of uncertainty because of the situation behind it. Mute.
In the chat, Dr. Wizard says, weird cousin, Themo Gray sad. Like emo. Themo Gray sad. I love that. I hope King of the North is watching. All right, so... Yeah, the Theon thing is definitely heavy. And Ned, again, is the kind of person to take that on. So, yeah. But as far as Ned's honor, let's get into Ned's honor. Because this is really...
I think for Ned's sake, even though Ned would have done it, but he wouldn't have been happy to do it. Like, the entire time he was raising Theon, he was probably thinking, please, Balon, don't be stupid. Please, Balon, don't be stupid. Like, I don't think, like, he wouldn't want to do it. He would, but he'd hate it.
For sure. Yeah. It's more about taking Theon on, understanding that was the scenario. Like, just signing up for that is like, or it's like, who could even handle that kind of burden? Ned. So, Ned's honor, it's interesting, his critics and his admirers both talk about the same thing, which is his honor. Like, his critics, for example, this is a great line from George. It's from Peter Baelish. But it caused me to reflect on the way that George writes humor differently for different characters. Like, there's the Tyrion, Jaime humor. Robert is funny in a certain way. Ygritte is funny. Tormund is funny. And Peter Baelish is funny, too. You wear your honor like a suit of armor, Stark. You think it keeps you safe, but all it does is weigh you down and make it hard for you to move. And so you get this picture of a knight in too much armor. Very much like Varys Egan in the Vale against Bronn, right? Bronn, lightly armored, nimble, won the fight. So, point is, Peter's criticizing Ned, still talking about his honor. So there's no question Ned is an honorable dude. So the thing is, being honorable in the end is only one component of being a good ruler, right? Mm-hmm. You also need political savvy. You need to know how to build alliances. You need to know how to govern in peacetime. These are also important qualities. So I think a lot of the people that are in power is part of George's commentary on what makes a good ruler. Talks about it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think he's definitely putting a lot of the best qualities in Jon and Dany. We're seeing a mix of various things. But, for example, Peter Baelish, he is cynical and nihilistic. He lacks any sort of moral compass. He's very politically savvy, and so he is effective. But that lack of moral compass will come back and bite him, okay? Because Sansa eventually will figure out what he's done to her and her family, and she's going to hate him, not love him. The Lannisters, similarly cynical and nihilistic, except for they're vain. So they need everybody to know that they did it. Whereas Peter likes working in the shadows. That's the difference, right? But there's a similar nihilism with Jaime and Cersei and even Tyrion. And it's just like, you know, what matters? It's only about brutal effectiveness. This weird Machiavellian kind of amorality, right?
Yeah, because like if we look at who the most successful rulers were in Westeros, well, we go to like examples would be like Jaehaerys the Conciliator, 50 plus year long reign. And that's because Jaehaerys had a good mix of political savvy, but also and being friendly and amicable, but also knowing when it was time to lay down the law. He really encompasses that like Teddy Roosevelt idea of walk softly, but carry a big stick. And when you're big, and that's pretty easy when your big stick is a dragon. He's got Vermithor. And then even for softer kings, like they say, like Daeron II is a great king, 25-year reign. He's not as strong-armed as Jaehaerys was, but as people noted, he had sons. He had like Maekar and Baelor Breakspear and Maekar, like sons who could make up for his less than harder spots to to make up for that strength. But here it's like, no, Ned has none of that. He's got the strength, but he does not have the political savvy. He's honorable, but he's too honorable to a fault. Sometimes you need to be slimy, but that's something that Ned doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to get into the muck. Mute.
People are comparing him to Cregan in the chat. When Cregan comes down during the Dance of the Dragons, he lays down the law, he plays hand for a couple days or whatever it is, and then he leaves. And people are like, yeah, that's the move. Ned was trying to do that. He was trying to come down and help Robert, and as soon as Robert did something that he didn't approve of, he stood up to him and eventually resigned his hand. And he just couldn't figure out who to execute quick enough, basically. Yeah. That was the problem. He got down there and just couldn't quite put it together in time to cut the right people's heads off.
Yeah. Whereas another difference there is Cregan Stark, to his point, he also had a very profound effect on Aegon III when he left. Like Aegon took something from him. From his presence. It's something Joffrey did not pick up from Ned. That's another big difference between Cregan and Ned. Like, at least when Cregan left, Aegon III was a good kid. Depressed, broken, but a good kid who's going to do his best.
Interesting parallel.
Hmm.
Interesting parallel. Yeah, it's like a similar story, but at a certain point they take this divergence.
Yeah.
So the Tyrells. The Tyrells are good at peacetime politics, building alliances, currying favor, understanding that like a certain amount of taking care of the people makes you popular, and that works for everybody. However, they are ultimately playing politics without a moral compass or any kind of spirituality. So they don't understand that you just can't take the second born, Renly, and just skip him over Stannis. Yeah, it makes sense in a utilitarian way because Renly's more charming and he's the one you can get, but like he's the second born and that means something. They don't understand the old gods of the North and what that means to people in the North and what Ned means to people because they themselves, they don't have that kind of spiritual grounding. Like they are adherents to the faith of the Seven, but they're probably the kind of people that just go to church. Like they just see it as another political theater. They don't seem to really have much of a. What do they believe in? Let the good times roll, I guess. And that's not bad. But they don't stand for anything. They don't compel people to stand for them. Marjorie does some of that. Marjorie begins to take care of the poor in King's Landing, and that is building genuine loyalty. So I will give Marjorie some credit. And again, the Tyrells, as peacetime rulers, like those are the kind of people you want mostly. Like they've got a fair amount of skill. And keep in mind, they're from a wealthy region, so they have a lot of resources to give out, to curry favor. So that's what you want with people with resources. You want them to be shared. They bring a lot of food to King's Landing. They feed people. That's good. But they also like are switching sides each time somebody new takes power, right? And that's going to catch up to them.
Yeah. Yeah, the Tyrells have no loyalty. They're opportunists. But at the same time, they know, like, you can win people over with bread. When people are starving, bologna's going to look like filet mignon to them. So the Tyrells have it pretty easy by being from the Reach, being the breadbasket, being the fruit garden of Westeros, being able to bring food. It is an easy way to win the people to your side, even though you might be just as easily sell those same people out tomorrow if someone else comes showing that they're stronger than the current horse you're betting on.
Right, so the Tyrells are almost like too cute. Like they find out Joffrey's a monster, and so they're like, well, we'll let Marjorie wed him to lock down the alliance, and then we'll murder him at the wedding. It's like that's really threading the needle there.
Yeah, because his brother is more malleable.
And they think they can do that. So there's a little bit of hubris there, but yeah. So again, Ned's honor is a very important component of being a ruler. And the things we criticize him for are generally going to be just ones of like naivete, judgment, decision making, and stuff like that. So now the thing about Ned's honor, because it is real and because it is based in morality, it very much is like a moral compass for all the Starks and a lot of Northmen too. So you guys know those little wristbands that say WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I really like those things because it's a very effective way. You guys know I view all religions primarily as, metaphorically and not literally. However, every religion has good teachings in it. And this idea of the Christ figure is that of like an ideal human. The example that the Jesus of the Bible sets is he's very humble, right? He goes amongst the most lowly of society and teaches everyone else to see them as humans. A lot of people say, oh, Jesus is a hippie. You can make that argument. He's setting, it's this a certain example of a type of person. So by putting a wristband on what would Jesus do, it's just supposed to be a constant reminder. It's like, what is the best, highest action that I could make in this situation. Like, yes, I would be justified in hating this person, but what would Jesus? Jesus would forgive them. Maybe I should think about that. It's just a reminder to act to your higher self, right? Ned Stark is the same. All the Stark kids have WWND wristbands around their hearts. They really do. With the exception of Arya, possibly. We'll talk about Arya. Arya is a little bit of an exception. She's a unique case. Because
Every
unfortunately...
family needs a wild card.
What's that?
I said every family needs a wild card.
Well, it's not just that she's a wild card. It's that Arya chafes against the patriarchy, and Ned is enforcing the patriarchy. Ned is telling her, oh, you're going to grow up and be a lady of a castle. And she's like, yeah, no, I don't want that. And Ned, he sort of hears that. Like, he gives her a sword and allows her to train. So he kind of honors that. But at the same time, like, Arya doesn't see him quite the same as the other kids do, because he's presenting to her a future that she doesn't want. And so you see her taking on some different ideas with the Faceless Men.
And you can see, though, that Ned chafes with it because he recognizes that there's so much of Lyanna and Arya, but he also knows that it was Lyanna's bullheadedness is also what got her killed. It's what led her to run off with Rhaegar and everything that happened. So I think that's the same thing. Like, he recognizes it in Lyanna, but he also knowing what happened to Lyanna, he's trying to prevent it. He looks at Arya and says that we're not going down that road again. I can't let that happen. And that's probably why he seems so firm with her, even though he knows that's not what she wants. He's like, I know it's not what you want, but it's what's going to keep you safe. It's what's going to keep you alive. I'm not going to lose you the way I lost her.
Yeah, so I did want to... Well, and we can come back to Arya. But for the most part, the thing about Ned is that even though he's dead, his honor remains intact. And it is something that his kids will use to make the right choices as they become the heroes of the story. And so ultimately, Ned's example will carry the day over the cynicism and nihilism of people like the Lannisters, Peter Baelish, and even the Tyrells. So, now we can criticize Ned. He is naive at Southern politics. He very much fails with Sansa in particular to prepare her for wedding the king and living in King's Landing. She should have been prepared more like Marjorie. And she's only a couple years younger than Marjorie, but the difference between them feels like 10 years. Because Marjorie's been prepared by the Queen of Thorns for King's Landing life. Ned, he is naive. Jon Arryn's kind of naive. And Ned learned politics from Jon Arryn. And so that's what we see with Sansa when she comes to King's Landing. She's naive. She's completely not ready. She has to learn on the fly from people like the Hound and Cersei and Peter Baelish and Joffrey. It's tough. So we can criticize him for that. He did, however, teach his kids how to rule the North, in a sense. Yeah. You know, the traditions of the old gods, guessed right. If you're going to pass a sentence, you have to swing the sword. Be responsible for your own edicts. Eat amongst your men. There's a certain thing that he's teaching his kids. It's just not King's Landing politics. Every house, it's interesting, Tim, every house teaches their different customs. Like, I wrote it, Oberyn's kids, they're all teen murder stars. They're poisoners and weapons masters. That's just what they teach in Dorne. They know how to milk vipers and shit.
Yeah. For Ned's part, it's kind of also like just how I had said with Arya and him looking at her at Lyanna, his way of parenting and his way of politicking by sticking to the North, by being an isolationist, by focusing only on the North. That's also him doing the opposite of what his dad did, because he's probably looking at, well, Rickard, my father, tried to get involved in Southern politics, and what did it get him? He's dead and my brother's dead and here's a war. Like, he probably... So it is a rejection, but but Ned's problem is he rejected too much. It's like, no, I get why you want to close yourself off and prevent that from happening, but he closed himself off completely and that became his detriment. But because by closing himself off completely, he became completely ignorant of what was happening south of the Neck. That's why he gets to King's Landing and has no idea that Robert has beggared the realm. He ruled thinking like, oh, my kids are just going to marry my children of my vassals. He wasn't making political plays the way Eddard Stark was. It just wasn't a thing for him.
So 2 things. One, Sierra Bird says Arya would thrive in Dorne, and that's never occurred to me, but now I want that so much for Arya. She really would do well in Dorne. People would appreciate how badass she is, you know. The Sand Snakes would love her. She should be an honorary Sand. Oh man, I want this now.
Yeah, it's who do you push for in your relationship? Are you Arya x Gendry or are you Arya x Ned Dane?
Yeah, she should Ned Dane, and then she could be an honorary Sand Snake. Yes, I want this.
Yeah, who do you ship?
This is almost enough for me to make me read fan fiction, but it's not. But what you were saying, Rickard was getting involved in Southern politics. Keep in mind, most of the time he was doing that, Ned was in the Vale. And even though Jon Arryn was involved too, Ned was not getting taught by Rickard. Like Brandon was. Lyanna was. Ned was not. Ned learned from Jon Arryn, however you want to say that. And then when Rickard's plans blow up, Ned is the one left holding the bag. We don't even know how aware Ned was of Rickard's plotting. Really, like maybe he was in on the loop, maybe he wasn't. But he was definitely left holding the bag. So that just adds to the unexpected burden of Ned. Like he wasn't even the firstborn son of Rickard, sitting in with all of Rickard's meetings and understanding the plotting. Because you can see Sansa is there with Peter in all Peter's meetings, and Peter ends up explaining to Sansa after the meeting, what were we doing? What was I saying really in that moment? What were they thinking? This is what Rickard would have been doing for Brandon, but not as much for Ned because Ned was in the Vale. So all the more sucky for Ned to have that blow up in his face when he wasn't even really probably in on it too much. We're just guessing. Maybe he was, but in between 16 and 18, maybe he was brought in on it in those 2 years. We just don't know. But
no, I agree. It seems he probably learned more of Jon Arryn's way of politicking than he did from his father.
Exactly, as far as the style of politics, exactly right. Rickard, yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. Like, we don't know what Hoster Tully was really like when he was younger. But I kind of get the feeling like Rickard may have been a key person in this plot, really. But yeah, hard to say. So, continuing on with Ned's honor, I want to talk about how it's based on, it's real, okay? And it is very much the lens that helps us clarify RLJ. So, it's like, would Ned really marry Kat and then immediately go off and have a bastard and bring him home? That's pretty messed up. It actually occurs to me, Tim, even more messed up if he had done that to Ashara. Because Ashara is a highborn lady. Ned's married. To get her pregnant and leave her with his kid, that completely dishonors her. So for Ned to do that, like, he would be dishonoring Ashara and Kat in one stroke, and it doesn't fit with his character. And then what we get as a compelling story out of that is that Ned lets everyone think that he did do that, even though he didn't. So it's like this honorable man lets his honor, quote unquote, get besmirched because of family and duty. And so that just shows you he's doing the right thing, even when he doesn't get credit for it. And again with Sansa, when he takes the heat, oh yes, I plotted to bring down Robert Baratheon. He confesses to all this horrible shit that makes him look terrible to try to save Sansa's life. So even though his honor is important, it's not the flimsy kind of honor. It's not my reputation. It's about really doing the right thing. That's what his sense of honor comes from, trying to stick up for his family. Go ahead. But you see my point.
Yeah, because it reminds me of that line from Maester Aemon, "Love is the death of duty." What is honor again compared to the feeling of a newborn child in your arms? Like, Ned is willing to sacrifice, as important as his honor is to Ned, he's willing to sacrifice it to protect those that he loves. And it's the same, like you said, how he does that for Sansa, and how he's willing to live this lie to protect Jon. Now, I'm of the opinion that Catelyn was probably, I don't even think there were any camp followers with Ned. Like, I legitimately think Catelyn may have been his one and only in that regards, but that's not the story that goes around because of the existence of Jon Snow.
Yeah, they definitely spread a lot of fake stories to try to sell people on this idea that Ned has done this thing, because it doesn't fit with his character. And people might be suspicious of it. But he really did take Jon home, and Catelyn really was sore about it. And by not telling Catelyn, it created a genuine tension that other people could observe that helped sell the lie. So Ned sacrificed some amount of peace in his own relationship to sell it and to keep Jon safe. So yeah, he really does do the right thing, even when he doesn't get credit for it. And Corn Halfhand is saying the same thing to Jon when he's like, your personal honor doesn't matter. We're here to keep the Seven Kingdoms safe. We're here to save people's lives. And if you have to break your vows and let people think you're a turncloak and actually be a turncloak for a minute, then that doesn't mean anything. That's pride. That's ego. So like, George is very interested in this idea of false honor versus really doing the right thing for the right thing's sake because it helps people or because your family, needs you or whatever. So you can see that Jon has learned that from Ned. And this is just what I mean about the WWND bracelets. Like, Jon more than anyone.
There was a super chat that went by. We didn't catch it, but someone brought that up with Jon beheading Janos Slynt. Taking a page, when Jon is going to behead Slynt, he says, "Ed, fetch me a block." I think Gurm hits at the leads. Yeah, that's Jon taking a lesson from Ned. From Ned, like, if the man who casts the judgment should be the one to follow through with it.
So, in case anyone doesn't know, there's a story behind that. Originally, Jon did hang Slynt, and I think it was his editor or one of his close friends reading his draft that was like, that doesn't seem right. Jon should cut his head off like Ned did. And George was like, oh, that's a great idea. You're right. And so he wrote the scene to where Jon was like, let's do this. No, let's do that. So that's the story behind that. It was actually somebody else's idea that George had to be like, oh, you're right. Jon should do that. And now it turns into this really meaningful moment where Jon thinks about ice and thinks about Ned. And then his sword even runs with morning light, and we get that dawn ice symbolism there. And turns into, so it's a great scene. And
that's why it's so important for writers to have a good relationship with their editors, because when you do, your editors will pick up on things like that and be like, no, this is out of character. You should do this. And then even the writer will be like, yeah, you're right. My idea was dumb. I should do what you said.
Oh, no matter how brilliant an artist you are, you're always getting some amount of ideas from other people, and it's important to appreciate that. Like, just putting the script together last night, I called up Maynard James Plum, my good friend and channel manager, and he had several takes that I hadn't thought about that got into the script, and it's better for that. So, and then you're here, Tim, putting in your 2 cents.
And you also know from earlier today, I'm prepping, because I put out my Out of the Ages video this past Friday, and I'm prepping to do the next story. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh snap, I gotta tell Dave about this one, because might help him with his Ironborn thing.
You're not allowed to say trapezohedron. Not today. That's too big. We got to talk about that a different day.
No, yeah,
The
just
deep
letting it out
ones,
there. Like,
the deep ones moving meteorites around underwater, and you hadn't told me until just now, Tim. Tim. No, it's actually great because I figured it out on my
yeah,
own using A Song of Ice and Fire that was probably what was happening. And then you're like, oh
yeah.
yeah, no, that's yeah.
No, because I find like, yeah, I need to read these stories for myself again before I record it, because now I'm reading them with the intention of giving a voice to the character, which means reading it in a different way.
Well, I saw that. I listened to it this morning, your video from yesterday. And yeah, I saw you're doing more of the character voices and the character acting that we were getting into on the Dunk and Egg stuff. So that was cool.
Yeah, this next one's going to be a lot more fun because our main character in this one's more of a smarmy shit. He's kind of more of the, God, I guess I'll save. Like he's begrudgingly saving the world against people's stupidity, and you can just tell he's like, fine, I don't want to do
Little
this.
Elric vibes there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, like when I was reading the Elric stories, they reminded me more of Lovecraft than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the weird environments that he went into, the dreamscapes and like the weird friggin' aliens and demon intelligences. Like it's pretty Lovecraftian, to be honest. Moorcock is weird. That's a weird universe. There's parallel dimensions and shit. Like,
yeah.
Anyway,
Moorcock also palled around with some of those guys like Carter and Lumley, so they definitely all have influence.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the same cultural milieu.
Mm-hmm.
So, real quick, Kelly Johnson with a good question. What do you think of Show Marjorie being ignorant of Joffrey's poisoning, where book Marjorie was in on the plot? Well, it just creates a different character. Thank you, Jamie Egg. I'll get that in a second. Creates a different character. Marjorie knowing about it shows you that she's a little more grown up. She's a little more like the Queen of Thorns. You know, if the Queen of Thorns is arranging this murder and not telling Marjorie, then it's like she's protecting Marjorie. If Marjorie knows about it, then it's more like the Queen of Thorns training Marjorie how to be a boss. And I think that makes more sense, that Marjorie would know. And she's doing acting when she's like, oh my God, somebody help him, he's choking. Like when you read that, see, I just reread it recently, and when you read that, thinking about Marjorie doing acting right there, it's delicious. I mean, it's rich. It really is. I know it's a gut-wrenching scene, but like she's just like, somebody help him, he's choking. It's hilarious. It's like, okay, I see you, Marjorie. I see you. But hey, you do what you got to do, man. I wouldn't want to marry Joffrey. So Ned and Robert. Let's talk about Ned and Robert. Oh, actually, Kelly had a couple more, or one more, and somebody else had another. Let me check here. Kelly Johnson says it was a punch to the gut to see the wonderful Natalie Dormer Marjorie taken out by some lame last-minute plotting by Cersei. It was, although I enjoyed her acting in the scene where she was the one that was like, something's not right, and people just wouldn't listen to her in time. I did feel something with that. I thought that was well written as an isolated scene. She's probably not going to live to the end of the story. You can only marry so many kings and so many Lannisters before that catches up with you, but I'm not sure how her end will go. It could be similar. I do think the Sept of Baelor will be blown up. And it might be related to Cersei's trial, or it could be related to when Fagon tries to take the city. But Marjorie could be involved either way. Maybe Marjorie's praying in the Sept during the battle, you know, and it gets set off. Like she probably doesn't live, because I don't think she lives to try to marry Fagon. I think Fagon is marrying Arianne, or potentially even Sansa could get involved with that plot line.
Yeah, Fagon's already got too many marriage options to be throwing a third or a fourth in there.
Yeah, I think Marjorie will be done after King's Landing, but that's just a guess. Kelly Johnson again asking both of us, do we get chills when watching season 1 quote of Maester Aemon to Jon, considering how that was the entire of the series being given away in that moment? I don't know which quote you're talking about, do you? A Targaryen alone in the world, or what was it?
Yeah, do you want to? Is there a specific quote you're hinting at, or are you just talking like kind of everything that Aemon said to Jon?
I do think all the Maester Aemon Jon stuff is more poignant when you reread it, knowing that Jon's a Targaryen, obviously.
Yeah, and also with the idea that Jon's real name might actually be Aemon, because there's no way Rhaegar named him Aegon when he already had.
I think that's really dumb. I hate it. Yeah.
No, and Jon did always used to picture himself as Aemon the Dragon Knight when him and Robb would pretend play.
I really think it makes a lot of sense. I've always been a fan of that theory. The thing about Aemon and Jon is that, think about Aemon's deathbed scene when he's anguishing over not being able to get to Daenerys. What he doesn't know is that he's already gotten to Azor Ahai Reborn. He's been a major influence on Jon. He just didn't know Jon was a Targaryen and didn't know that Jon was the other half of the prince that was promised, whatever. Because, of course, I think Jon and Dany, essentially, together, are the prince that was promised. And, yeah, it redeems the moment. It's like, it's comforting. Because you think of Aemon like, oh, he couldn't get to Dany. But if only he knew that he did help Jon quite a bit.
I like Brienne's fat sister. Like Marge is going to get caught for her affair with Oraine Waters and get snicked. Yeah, I am a fan. I also am a fan of that theory that Marjorie has been secretly getting down with Oraine Waters before he stole the Dromans and left.
I definitely think it would be interesting writing if, yes, for the most part, Cersei is making up wild accusations about Marjorie, but somewhere in there, like, yeah, Marjorie fucks, right? Like,
well, there's a scene. It's Cersei calls the small council together really late at night. When she gets down there, Oraine Waters is already there in the council chamber, and then Marjorie shows up later. Her hair is a mess and her dress is disheveled. And the idea is that she and Oraine were hooking up. And it's also because it means Cersei was spurned again. Another Valyrian man spurned her for a brunette.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
I think it was Nimshet. It was either Grey Area or Nimshet. It was one of the ladies from Direwolf City that I first heard that from. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. So...
If we're talking about three heads of the dragon, Euron is the third head. I'm very certain of that. Euron is the evil dragon head. He's more Azor Ahai Reborn than anyone, in a way. So yeah, those are the three heads of the dragon. I don't know if Euron is also supposed to be the prince that was promised. I think that only applies to Jon and Dany. But, whatever, and both Jon and Dany both do Nissa and Azor Ahai stuff. Jon's death is very comparable to Nissa's death. And Dany's done both as well. So yeah. It's not, you don't have to choose. These are archetypes. So, Ned and Robert. Like I said, Brandon is similar to Robert. And Ned is similar to Stannis. So they each understood they had a place carved in their space for that kind of a person. You know what I mean? For Ned to grow up with Brandon and then to go hang out with Robert, it's like, this feels similar. And the same thing, Robert is used to trying to make Stannis laugh, and now he gets to try to make Ned laugh. It's the same dynamic. So that's part of their compatibility. The thing that Ned and Robert have in common is determination. Once these guys get a bone, they ain't letting go. They both are similar in that sense. And I think when they had that falling out in King's Landing, that was Ned going, I thought we were similar. I thought we were more similar than we were. I thought we shared the same moral compass as well. And it turns out we don't. And it's a big thing. It comes back up when Ned and Robert reunite during the story, obviously. So I've written in here, Tim, that I feel like Ned becomes the older brother to Robert, even though Robert is the older one. He, like, some of the advice he was never able to give to Brandon, I feel like he tried to give to Robert. He tried to steer him. Robert may have seemed like a more coachable version of Brandon. Because just like Lyanna, Brandon's hot-headedness got him killed very clearly. So maybe if Ned feels like guilt over not being able to steer his brother in the right direction and his sister, now he gets to try to do it again with Robert. He gets to try to make up for that and do it right, which is something that people do to try to work out their trauma over mistakes they've made, right?
Yeah, because Robert and Brandon were both the older sibling, yet at the same time they were more immature. And then Ned and Stannis, they're the middle children, but it's like they came out the womb as old, acting like old men. Like that's just kind of their mentality. And it happens. Sometimes the younger one is the more mature and actually is the one that has to kind of make up for the elder brother's shortcomings. Unfortunately, though, for Stannis, guys like Stannis and Ned, and a lot of these second sons that we see time and time again, when order of birth is kind of the determination of what you're going to get and what you're going to inherit, it can be a real obstacle, which is why you want to try and steer them. Maester Aemon as well, because he tries to do the same thing for his older brother, Daeron the Drunkard. Like, he probably would have been the better king, but he tried to steer his brother into a better path, but it didn't work. And then he abdicates so that his younger brother can have it.
Yeah, and in both cases, Ned and Stannis might be compensating for their reckless older brother a bit, you know.
Like, he's too out of control, so now I have to be the good one so that we have some semblance of respect around here.
Totally. Like just this past weekend, I went to see Gentleman's Club, who's a big dubstep DJ collective from the UK. And my friend had a connection, so we got to go backstage and hang with them. And only 2 of the 3 were there, but like one of them was getting really twisted. And so the other guy was like, I'm staying sober, you know, I got to be the one in control tonight because, you know, he's doing his thing or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you know, you got to be there for your homie when he's a little wilding out or whatever. So that's part of why Robert appreciates Ned, even though he's constantly poking his stiffness. He needs him. He needs somebody to keep him in line. And Jon Arryn was gone, and so Robert realized, like, if I need somebody to keep me in line, I'm not in control. And so he turned to Ned again to do that. So when Ned was going down to King's Landing, the reason why he's so reluctant is because he's stepping back into this role of trying to control a Brandon Robert type. And it didn't really work. It's never worked for him very well. And so here he goes again. It's like the main thing they fought over was the death of those children. And the pillaging of King's Landing that went with it. And so here they are again on the way down, and Robert is already talking about having Dany killed. And this is why it's such a big issue for Ned, because they never settled it. They never really settled it. You know?
Yeah. And that's because it is like, killing the Mad King was one thing. Like, no matter how we look at Robert's rebellion and whether it was built on a lie, the truth is Aerys needed to go. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Robert had to be the one to do it. It could be like probably the better, more likely option would have been for a in-house bloodless coup like Rhaegar was trying to pull with the Tourney at Harrenhal, to just quietly remove his dad and then put himself on the throne and kind of maybe do an easy transition. Hopefully there's not too much backlash. But I think as a realist, though, I don't think Aerys' death is the only way he would have gone down. Even with his son Rhaegar, I don't see him giving it up without a fight. But still, that was the best case scenario. We just didn't get that.
There is, I don't know if it's a rumor or if it's a more reliable account that Aerys was thinking about disinheriting Rhaegar for Viserys. So people think that he actually did that.
I think it did come up. Like, it was a threat that he had made. It's the same thing and it's not unheard of. Aegon the Fourth did the same thing with his own kid, like threatened to disinherit him and put one of his bastards on the throne. So that would, that's just George tracing parallels back to his other characters.
Yeah, someone that deep in the throes of paranoia, he would have turned on Rhaegar if Rhaegar had tried to depose him. I have little doubt.
Yeah, and also because Viserys was, 8 at that point? So would have been more malleable, whereas Rhaegar's a man grown at that point.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting questions of the whole story. It's like, what was Rhaegar doing? Where did he make the transition from going to Summerhall and trying to build political alliances to thinking more only about prophecy and running off with Lyanna and ignoring the obvious political fallout of what that would do? Like,
yeah,
there's a story there I really would like to know.
Yeah, because what it is like Rhaegar was making the right moves until he put prophecy ahead of everything, and that was his downfall.
Yeah, because it's just a completely different goal.
Yeah, because the tourney at Harrenhal was a good idea, and even though Aerys showing up threw a wrench in that, it also still helped him in a way, because now people saw Aerys for what he was. He had held himself up in the Red Keep for years. And like I said, that's when people see him and they're like, oh, God, look at him, But then Rhaegar made the mistake of giving Lyanna, naming her the Queen of Love and Beauty above his own wife. And then that's when people gave the side eye to Rhaegar and was like, man, maybe I don't know about this. Maybe it isn't. Maybe he isn't that great. Like, it sowed too much doubt.
Yep.
He shot him. Like, Rhaegar, I have never known someone to get in their own way the way Rhaegar does.
It's again, we just want to know the rest of the story so we can figure out, are we supposed to be more sympathetic or more judgmental about it? Because depending on how it fell out, it could be like, you friggin' idiot, or like, oh man, like, that really is a tough situation. So
I shot myself in the foot once, but I still got one more foot. No way this gun is still loaded. Like, that's Rhaegar.
I guess what I'm saying is that in general, I like to assume that people are smart and they do things for a reason. So it's like when somebody does something that doesn't make sense, it's probably that you don't have information. That if you understood, even if you don't agree, you'd at least understand what their thinking was. So we will have to wait. But yeah, I mean, him and Lyanna hiding out caused it caused a few problems. Now, he didn't probably count on Brandon doing what he did, or Peter Baelish potentially doing what he did to spur Brandon on. But, you leave yourself vulnerable to stuff, and then stuff happens.
He went to the Capitol and told the prince, come out and die? Like, yeah, nobody who does that? Oh, him, apparently. Like, that's just Brandon Stark.
Can you imagine Rhaegar and Lyanna at the Tower of Joy getting that news? Being like, your brother did what? And Lyanna's like, well, he is kind of rash, but damn. And then it's like, well, we both know your dad's crazy. Rhaegar's dad. Like, yeah, well, fuck, he's crazy. We know that. There are some conversations, man. I hope George writes some of these. I'd love to hear them.
You can't. That's the curse of not, like, you can't choose your family.
Yeah, and that's still, and the George loves to put people in this thing of, like, on one hand, politics and normal concerns, and on the other hand, prophetic need, and they're gonna clash, and they're just gonna smash you up in the middle, and that's kind of what I see with Rhaegar and Lyanna. Both of them made this rash decision, had something to do with prophetic need, and we know there was something to it because we need Jon, and they made Jon. And maybe Jon needed to be conceived right then for some reason that we don't fathom. So, yeah, it's just how George wrote it, man.
Yeah.
It's supposed to
and
be
I
tough.
guess to correct myself, I guess you can choose your own family because found family is a thing. You can't choose the blood relatives that you get, I guess I should say.
So Grey Waste Tim is saying, he was talking about when Maester Aemon told Jon there comes a choice in every man's life, a time in every man's life when he must choose and live with that choice for the rest of his days. And yeah, there's a lot of moments like that with Ned and with everyone involved in this story. Yeah, George loves crushing people between different forces and needs like that. And it's the same thing with Ned, with like having to say that he was plotting against Robert in order to try to save Sansa's life or, protect her to some extent. There wasn't really a good choice there at that point. Anyway. So, other thoughts about Ned, Sir Tim, or the chat?
So I guess I'm trying to think of like what are things that we didn't really talk about, but I guess we could talk more about Ned's relationship with Benjen because we haven't said anything about Benjen once. I mean, he always is kind of the forgotten child.
Yeah, that's sort of a separate topic because it all comes back to like, what was Benjen's role in whatever happened with the Tower of Joy and all that stuff? Why did he take the black? We just don't know. We need information there too.
Yeah. As for the Ashara Dane stuff, like I'm on the boat that I do think that Ashara Dane is still around, that she's with Howland Reed. Because let's remember, Torny at Harrenhal, Howland was bunking with Ned. So when they say like Ashara Dane went back to Ned's tent, that doesn't mean that she was going there to see Ned. Howland Reed was there too. So I think she hooked up with that little Cranog man. She's riding Howland Reed's moving castle.
Yep, I think it's a good theory. It's pretty solid. And I think Alyssa Farman Quaithe is the best Quaithe. So there you go. Works for me. Let's talk about Ned killing the Night's Watchman. He's, Ned said something, he's rambling about this and that. Like, it's definitely Ned's job to pay attention for signs of the others. And when a Night's Watchman comes down to you with his brain scrambled like that, it was definitely a mistake to just execute him, was it not? We have to say it was.
Yeah, because that is one of the things. It's the question of, I've said like that whole line about the North remembers, and I've said, no, you don't. The North forgets a lot. It becomes a question of when did they stop believing? If we go back to Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, and this idea that maybe him and Aegon the Conqueror had a sit down, possibly with his bastard brother Brandon Snow, who was forging those arrows out of Weirwood points, like, yeah, okay, we can see it. Like, hey, they have a discussion about the others, and that's when Torrhen kneels and becomes part of the fold. It becomes the question of then, like, well, when did that stop being a thing? When did that stop being a priority? I think where the lines get muddied is after the Dance of the Dragons, because does Aegon II know about this prophecy, like the way House of the Dragon is handling it? Because we know that it's like when did the prophecy stop being a focal point is the problem.
Well, here's what I find interesting, and I talked about this in my video, What Lyanna Told Ned at the Tower of Joy. We can assume that Lyanna, part of her running off with Rhaegar, it was her coming to believe in Rhaegar's vision of prophecy. So Lyanna at least was raised in such a way that she did not scoff at Rhaegar's dreams and visions and Valyrian knowledge. So I suspect that what we're seeing is more Ned's personal reaction and view on magic and prophecy, because he knows that Rhaegar and Lyanna had some crazy belief about the prince that was promised Valyrian something, and that's why they ran off and caused so much trouble. And he views Lyanna as a tragic death. So he probably has come to a negative view about prophecy and magic, because it's like, oh, that got Rhaegar and Lyanna killed. So that's a mess. And so that, I think, is part of the reason why he was like, the others. Because Kat talks about the others when, you know, when she says there are darker things beyond the wall. And he's like, they're as gone as the children of the forest. He shows you he's skeptical about magic stuff. He doesn't believe. That could have something to do with Lyanna having done what she did.
No, that actually makes sense, because that runs in line with what I said about why Ned became more of an isolationist. If he's rejecting this view of prophecy the way Lyanna and Rhaegar saw it, as like, no, this is what got you killed. It's the same way as him rejecting his father's notion of Southern politics as, no, that's what got you killed. So yeah, it could be just a post-traumatic response to these things that happen, and be like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So people are asking, what is Ned's moral code? How do you sum it up easily? I would say that it comes down to doing the right thing. And I know that's kind of vague, but it means that, like, in a different situation, the right thing might be different, and you have to just try to figure out what it is and then do that thing no matter how much trouble it causes you. And I also think that Ned, what was I going to say about his ethics? Oh, yes. So he says to Bran, you know, the only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid. And I think that applies. We think about that in a warrior sense, but really, like, having true morality does take bravery. It is easy to give in to just, writing people off, justifying yourself so you don't have to look hard in the mirror, taking shortcuts mentally instead of holding yourself accountable, and really trying to do the right thing, and then being willing to bear the consequences. So that's where Ned is coming from, is like, he is willing to do the right thing no matter what, and he's willing to bear those consequences, and does. That is his honor, I would say. Your thoughts?
Oh, one thing I do was, someone made the comment of, like, Ned not picking up on the symbolism of the dead dire wolf and the stag. And that made me think, like, oh, because I already made that comparison at the beginning of the stream where I said Ned's like a Hank Hill. That just made me think of this other one. Ned's also like a Ron Swanson. He has this line like, my favorite book is Moby Dick. No silly foo-foo symbolism. Just a story about a man hating an animal. And that makes me think of Ned. Like, yeah, you're not picking up on the signs here.
Yeah, I occasionally get that comment and be like, or maybe a spade is just a spade. Or,
Yeah. But that's another one of those, like, guys you wish was your dad figures, like Ned, Ron Swanson.
There's a fellow in the chat asking if I'll do a video on crow symbolism. You messaged me you left a comment on my video while you were drunk in a bar last night. I appreciated that very much. I just want to say, I generally don't do videos oriented like that, like crow symbolism or, moon symbolism. I'm more likely to talk about something and then mention crow symbolism because it has something to do with it. But in general, crows have to do with being eaters of the dead, guardians of the night, things like that. And you can see how that parallels with the Night's Watch, because they're watching over the dead. They almost are undead, psychopomp stuff. Edgar Allan Poe, yada yada yada. I don't know. I haven't given much more thought to it than that. Also, the crows and ravens come in obviously with Odin and his ravens, Hunan and Munin. So I do think crows and ravens are mostly pretty parallel as symbols. They also do work for meteor symbolism because they're flying things that are black, and they're compared to the darkest pit of night and the black hole in the abyss and other concepts that go along with the meteors that cause the long night. So George can make the hillside erupt with black ravens, and it's black meteor symbolism. Another time they pour out of the tree, like an eruption from the stars. The black ravens, blacking out the sky in that cold hand scene. That's one of my best favorite scenes. I love that one.
Yeah.
So, aren't crows messengers of the gods like in Norse mythology? Yes, that's Hunan and Munin are doing things like that. But I'm not sure how much the Night's Watch are acting as messengers. That's more like the birds themselves that are, talking for the skin changers.
Yeah.
So they literally are the messengers of the old gods.
Yeah. Another messenger for the gods is the squirrel. There's that one squirrel who yeah, he's running the messages between the eagle and the snake. And we get the children of the forest are squirrel people, and Arya gets that name Squirrel for a while. So,
do you think Robb Stark would have just married the Frey daughter if Catelyn didn't let Jaime go? Hard to say. I mean, that's a series of if this, then that things. I was talking about this with Maynard James Plum, my manager, last night. It's pretty strongly implied that they used a love potion on Robb, don't you think?
Well, actually, what I'm thinking is, again, Ned being honorable to a fault and that having an impact on his children. Robb following through with the marriage to Jane Westerling after he slept with her. That might be Robb not wanting to do to her what Ned allowed to be said about Ashara Dane. That might have been the impact that went into that decision.
You're right about that, and it also is an example of John. Well, I got to be honorable, or Robb trying to be too honorable. Like needed to mix in a little bit of savvy with that. Like I'd rather disappoint the Westerlings than the Freys. But
yeah.
Love potion, yes. Maggie the Frog that gave Cersei's prophecy is Jane Westerling's grandmother. Who was a magi. And that's where
because her mother is Sybil. Yeah, and I'm
Sybil
a fan
Spicer.
of the idea I'm a fan of the idea that the prologue for Winds of Winter might be from Sybil Spicer's point of view, because our prologue characters always die.
That's interesting. But yeah, Sybil Spicer's mother is supposed to be a magi, and that's Maggie the Frog. So they're talking about fertility potions, and really what it was is that it seems like Jane Westerling's mom was giving her a potion to try to make her not pregnant. We don't know. Like they could have been trying to have Robb's baby secretly and then telling the Lannisters they weren't. Or it could have been that Jane wanted to have Robb's baby, but her mother was giving her an abortive, moon tea instead of instead of pregnancy stuff. So the point is, this is a house that knows about potions, and Grandma is straight up a magi. So Robb suddenly falling in love with Jane Westerling and marrying her in one day, maybe that was misguided honor, or
it could be both,
It was a love potion and a trap, because that put Robb in the hands of the Westerlings, and they basically delivered him to Tywin, which then the Westerlings used to curry favor. So, yeah. There's a whole thing there. Whole thing.
So that's why George. That's the mystery. That's why George keeps these things, throws in all these elements, and keeps it purposely vague, because it can go either way. Is it a love potion? Is it Robb feeling misguided honor? and taking a lesson from his dad, or is it a bit, or is it somewhere in the middle and it's a bit of both? Like maybe, yeah, he comes down from the effects of the love potion, but still realizes like, well, whatever happened, I still made this mistake and I got to do right by it.
Well, that's the Westerlings banking on the Stark honor and trying to use it against them. Like, oh, if he gets her pregnant, then we've got it.
Yeah.
That's the idea. So that's the theory. Don't know if it's true or not. And yeah, it could have been that Jane and Robb were given the potion by Sybil. It could have been. Yeah. Again, it's like the Marjorie question. Jane doesn't seem in on it. She seems to genuinely love Robb in those scenes. I don't think she's acting. I think it would be Sybil doing the misleading. So. Love potion in the Arthurian legends also backfired and created Mordred. Oh, okay, so there could be some Arthurian parallels. That makes it even more likely to be true. Okay, yeah, Echoes of Tristan and Isolde. Yeah, we were just talking about that last week on the Dane Iceberg with Fayfire. And if you haven't checked out the Daneberg, part 1 and 2, that was a great stream. That was fun. Good times. We got way into the Danes, Tim.
Yeah, I saw part 1. Then I was like, wait, part 2. Then later, and I saw the part 2. I was like, wait, what's going on here? And I haven't gotten around to that one yet.
Yeah, this shit disconnected right in the middle. Like my internet crashed. Totally just crashed suddenly. It's just like,
Yep. Oh.
But yeah, part 2 is where all the good stuff is. I got down to the more I thought about King Arthur, the more I realized George is setting up Night's King as a frozen King Arthur. And that's why Arthur Dane is at the Tower of Joy with Dawn defending Night's Queen and her baby, symbolically. So, it's...
and now you got that little bit of info I told you about the Star Stones.
I didn't even know what to type back to you. You guys, I can only tease it right now. We're gonna have to. I'm trying to get these a certain way through the Ironborn video series before I uncork some of this shit. So just keep sending me these texts and keep it under your hat, and we'll get it.
Yeah, I'm getting straight. I got Labor Day off. I'm getting straight to work on Horror in the Gallery next. That's the next that'll be the next video on my channel. The next Zothic Legend Cycle story is called Horror in the Gallery, and it is just a treasure trove. Like really,
we're
really
coming
is.
up with a really satisfying explanation for this damn Seastone chair.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's always been confusing because there's all these different ideas associated with it, but now I think we've really figured out how they all fit together. So,
yeah, because once you take into account these stories I'm reading, and you remember these were written by a man that George R. R. Martin personally knew and was friends with, and also had a working relationship with. I'm reading out of the gallery. I'm like, George, like this is past the point of homage. You're kind of just straight up ripping things here.
He really is going for that saying where it's like, oh, well, if you copy enough people, then it's not plagiarism anymore because you're weaving together so many different things. Anyways, we do have over 600 people watching, and I'm all the way through everything I had to say about Ned. But if you guys are here that want to ask questions about whatever, I mean, I'll take some questions for a few minutes. I'm not one to just boot 600 people into boredom when I'm entertaining them. I don't like doing that. So, if you got questions for me or Tim, fire away, and we'll toss it around. I'm also trying to think of what else to say about Ned. I sort of talked about it in the Daneberg, but just that moment at the Tower of Joy when he faces down Arthur Dane. He's like, I looked for you on the Trident. Where were you? Like, calling him out for not being at the battle. And then he's like, now it begins. And Ned's like, no, now it ends. Like, this guy's carrying a big stick, if you know what I'm saying. And he's got a wheelbarrow for those balls, dude. Like, it's just Although I'm told that the origin of the saying brass balls has nothing to do with body parts, Tim. It has to do with pawn shop owners who would use brass balls to weigh things like, gold or whatever. And, you can't negotiate with a pawn shop owner. They're tough. So if someone's got brass balls, they're tough. You can't negotiate with them. It's not about, yeah. So anyone can have brass balls, regardless of gender. Officially. I did not know that.
Oh, here we go. So are there love potions? There was a super chat about love potions. Are there love potions or similar potions mentioned anywhere in the greater... Yes, actually, Egg talks about it. He says that his sister tries to give him a love potion.
That's it. And Mel talks about potions, too. And there's obviously lots of poisons. Mm-hmm. But Mel talks about powders that cause fear or fervor or, horniness, yes.
And just a little tidbit about love potions. In these types of scenarios, they usually involve including period blood in them. Just throwing that out there.
Jack Bond is asking about the Daneberg. Did you see the Went comment? Kat's mom is a Went of Harrenhal at the God's Eye. We were asking about why the Wents, why Oswald Went is there. Because, Dane and Hightower, they're both Great Empire of the Dawn. It's what is Went? Well, they're tied to Harrenhal. And Harrenhal is important for reasons of the tourney of Harrenhal. Also the God's Eye and stuff. But also, symbolically, it's a big black castle. And even though it's not fused stone, it was melted by dragon fire. So it's very similar to the fused stone fortress at Old Town in terms of symbolism. I still don't feel like I have a total bead on the bat and the Went symbolism and what it's doing at the Tower of Joy and what it says. Something about death and, psychopomp stuff, I think.
Because the Wents inherit Harrenhal after the fall of House Lothston, and Lothston also had a bat as their sigil. So I think the point is to try and connect Catelyn and therefore connects to the Loth.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. Oh. Did Tim freeze? Oh, there you're back.
Oh, where did I cut out at?
You said to the Lostons, only it was Lost.
Oh, okay. So what I was getting at is Danelle Loth. Am I still cutting out?
No, you're good.
Okay, so I was saying Danelle Lothston is a Witch Queen of Harrenhal figure. So by having the Wents be the followers, the successors to House Lothston, it connects the Starks and the Stark children through Catelyn, as it connects them to a Witch Queen of Harrenhal type thing.
That's pretty dope. I'll have to think about that. And I can't wait for what's her name? Well, I guess that's going to be in Fire and Blood too. Well, we should see some of it in the show too. Alice Rivers.
I did speak on the show about the parallel. Alice Rivers and Aemon One-Eye, a bastard Witch Queen of Harrenhal figure, hooks up with a one-eyed Targaryen prince, but then with Danelle Lothston showing up at White Walls with Bloodraven in the third Duncan Egg Tale, that is a Witch Queen, a legitimate born Witch Queen of Harrenhal, showing up with a one-eyed Targaryen bastard prince. So I've said I think my headcanon, my tinfoil theory is that, and this is a Grey Waste Tim original, I'm throwing it out there, I think Bloodraven may have had a thing going on with Danelle Lothston on the side. And that could be your Melisandre Bloodraven connection.
What do you mean the Melisandre Bloodraven connection?
There's always that idea. There's that theory thrown out there that Melisandre is the daughter of Bloodraven and Shiera Seastar.
Yeah.
And I've never liked that theory. However, Danelle Lothston is a redhead. So if Melisandre is a child of Bloodraven and her mother is Danelle Lothston, a Witch Queen of Harrenhal figure, there you go.
Okay, and it still makes sense that she might be named Melanie which is similar to Blackwood names because these are all Riverland names, and the names get passed around the regions.
And it would make sense how she's sold into slavery. Well, if the House Lothston falls and they need to escape if they're fleeing Westeros, children sold into slavery becomes they flee to Westeros. They can once you get
You
to
should
Essos,
make that
you're
video,
not,
Tim. You should make that video. You should. That'll be your biggest hit. That's pretty good. Melisandre isn't necessarily older than Bloodraven. That 400 years number is a show idea. We don't know how old she is. We just know that she's unnaturally prolonged her life. We don't know how much. Kelly Johnson, who still has the secrets of Garth the Green, his blood magic, since the Reach still has huge, bountiful harvests. I don't think there's actually any connection between blood magic and the bounty of the Reach. I think that is more mythology. But it would be like House Bulwer, perhaps. Somebody like that. Maybe House Crane. They're still skin changers. Having both the blood of the first man and the blood of the dragon would make Melisandre naturally more attuned to all magical power. Well, that's why I always have liked the theory that she is Bloodraven's child, because Bloodraven is half Targaryen and half Blackwood already. But yeah, I mean, Tim, you should definitely make that video. Have I ever touched on the coming grayscale plague? No, not really. I'm pretty stumped as to what George is doing with it. I really have no good ideas. It's going to be some other chaos agent. Somebody came up with a theory of John Connington falling into a well, like Alan Cockshaw, and spreading grayscale through the water supply of King's Landing. It's a good theory. Yeah. I don't know what the point is, other than just to make things worse, though.
So I was going back to make sure there was other super chats. If we were super chats with this, here's what there's one from Barris Aurelius. Can you talk a bit about Ned's bones and what significance they might hold going forward, if any? Yeah, because Barbary doesn't want to let Ned's bones come back.
I don't think there's a magical thing there. I think that's more of a character point in the story. You know, it means something for Barbary, and it'll mean something when Ned's bones are laid to rest in the crypts. So it'll be meaningful for the reader, you know, and the Starks. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's magic about it.
Yeah, because there might be magic involved, but the idea to me that every single Stark that ever lived has to be buried at Winterfell, that's not a possibility to me. Like, how are they ever supposed to leave home? You know, like, are we supposed to accept the idea that no Stark has ever died somewhere else and never been transported back?
No, you have to clean the bones off and send the bones back. That's what they did essentially with Ned. They were only sending bones, not a corpse. So why doesn't Ned treat Jon as king? Jamie asks. I'm not sure. I don't understand the question. Why would Ned treat Jon like a king? He never would do that. We're supposed to pretend he's a bastard, so why would he treat him like a king? Like, it doesn't make sense. And there isn't a secret plan to announce Jon and put him on the throne. The plan is to hide him for the rest of his life as Jon Snow to keep him safe. So nobody ever tries to use him to claim the throne.
Yeah, the plan was for Jon to take his vows, and then Ned was going to come visit him at the wall and then tell him the truth about his mother, because after taking his vows, he renounces all titles, and it wouldn't have mattered.
Yes. That made it safe to tell him. Travis is saying maybe grayscale affects dragons differently. Grayscale was created as a curse against the Valyrians, so that could happen. I could see the grayscale harming the dragons, or just being a threat to Dany or something, maybe. Will Ned's bones have something to do with Jon's identity reveal? I'm not sure. I think it'll just be really meaningful whenever it comes.
I think that was it for Super Chats. Were there any PayPals that came in?
No, we're all caught up on those.
Oh, Oh, speak of the devil, there's a new super chat.
Why would Ned tell Kat about John's origin? She seems like she would solidly keep. Why didn't he? She seems like she would keep the secret. I agree. I would have told her. It's hard for me to keep a secret. So in Ned's position, I would have told her. But by not telling her, it kind of sells the lie better because everyone around can see that it's a tense situation, and it sells it better. And also, it's like Ned thinks to himself, some secrets are too dangerous to share, so he just doesn't want anyone else to know. It's just fewer people know, the better. Sometimes, you know.
Yeah, like in the beginning, it makes total sense because they were strangers to each other. He didn't know if he could trust her with that information. But as the years went by, yeah, why didn't he tell her? Well, there's also maybe he was afraid that she might have been like, well, no, if that's what he really is, then we should press his claim.
What is the most interesting hereditary theory of any character in A Song of Ice and Fire? I would vote either Melisandre being Bloodraven's daughter or Quaithe being Alyssa Farman for me. I'm pretty curious about Mira being Ashara's daughter too. That's pretty fascinating. What do you say?
For me, it's the Phagon is secretly a Blackfire, and this is a 6th Blackfire rebellion that Varys is brewing.
Okay, Andy, again, I ignored this comment when I saw it earlier because I don't think it's this is going too far. Helena is pretty obviously written in a similar way to an autistic person. I don't think we need to go around looking for autism-coded people all over the story, and Ned doesn't fit at all, so I really don't. I don't get that. I'm making a frown. I'm not upset. I just don't like.
Yeah. When I made the Hank,
just easy on that. I would.
Yeah. I mean, when I made the Hank Hill Ron Swanson connections, like I'm serious. Like they are true, but I was also saying them to be funny. But I don't know if we're supposed to go looking for any kind of things like that. I think that's one of those problems where it comes with putting modern day sensibilities and modern day outlooks on things on a time period that didn't have those kinds of ideas.
I think that it is coming to be more of a practice for writers of shows and books to think about this more and to go ahead and write a character imagining that they have ADHD or anxiety or depression. I think that helps create realism because people have always had these conditions, and it helps create characters that are different. And with House of the Dragon, it's pretty clear that the way they approached Helena as somebody who is just, hearing a lot of prophetic visions and dreams from a very young age, is they're comparing it to the challenges with stimulus that people on autism spectrum have. I have issues with stimulus as well, being an ADHD person. There's some similarities. So some people found that offensive. Like, autism is autism. It's not a magical disorder. I kind of get that. But I also understand why they might see that comparison. Because it's like if you were bombarded with visions and dream whisperings that were very troubling, it would affect you. You would come across different, and you would, again, feel overstimulated and overwhelmed by things. So I thought it was a good choice to make, and I think most people that have experience with autism felt that it was good representation. And I think that it's easier to understand that the writers of House of the Dragon in the year 2022 were thinking about autism when they wrote Helena, as opposed to George Martin when he wrote Ned in the mid-90s. Like, pretty sure George Martin wasn't thinking about that when he wrote Ned. So I do think, Tim, that this is something that is evolving as we become more conversant with mental health, irregularity, neurodivergency, as people like to say, neurospiciness. Yeah, neurospicy. I do like that one. So I understand all the opinions on Helena, and see, Lonka's piping in. He agrees. He thinks it works. He's someone that deals with autism spectrum disorder as well. So, yeah, For the most part, I think it was done pretty well. What is my opinion on the Jamie is dyslexic theory? I've not heard that. Where's that coming from?
That's another show only line. Tywin's talking. I think he's talking to Arya, and he talks about how Jamie was having problems learning to read. He kept mixing up words, so Tywin dismissed the Maester and took Jamie's teaching into his own hands and like essentially sort of like beat it into him on how to read. But yeah, the idea is that Jamie was dyslexic. He was switching his words up.
Okay, so that's something the show added. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little character thing. Kelly Johnson, who built the advanced architecture on the Iron Islands that has stood against the ocean waves for thousands of years? Oh, I'll just spoil my whole Ironborn video for you, Kelly. Sure. I'll spoil the whole thing. I'm actually not sure. I'm developing 2 different hypotheses about it. And they both have logic to them. And so I'm not sure if in the course of finishing my scripts, I will settle on one option or the other, or if I will just present them both. But it is a strange tale for sure. And the more I look into it, the more different things are becoming involved. It's very complex. So I probably couldn't answer that one even if I wanted to. But I am trying to answer it in these series of videos. I will say that. And it wasn't, there may have been First Men involved, but it's not the First Men that we are thinking of. I'll say that much. Nelson, Aemond and Alice remind me of inverted Rhaegar and Lyanna. Aemond was also promised to Baratheon, and they were close to the Isle of Faces. Oh, that's interesting. I could sort of see that. Mike Boy says, Ned to me is just a representation of an anachronistic figure in a greatly changing fantastical story. That's probably a good way to put it. I agree with that.
The thing with Aemon though is like, did he make it? Because in the book the scene is I'm blanking on the name, the Baratheon who can't read, and he tells him like, I got 4 daughters, choose whichever one. And he never really makes a choice, just that the one like speaks up and says, well, I want a man with all his parts, and that's when he goes out and chases Luke. House of the Dragon didn't do that. They didn't have the scene of the daughter laying down that insult, but
yeah, they dropped the ball. They dropped the ball on that.
I'm not sure if Aemond ever went back and made a choice on which Baratheon girl he was going to marry. Did he actually commit to that deal?
I don't know, but it does work as a parallel.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's interesting. All right, folks. Well, I'm kind of tired of listening to Cleo scream in the background, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap. Tut right on cue. Right on cue. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate y'all. And the Ironborn video, I've got it about halfway done. It is a monster. I'm hoping to get it out. I might get it out by the end of this week. The latest possible date would be a week from this Tuesday. But I'm hoping to get it out a little before then. So we'll see. It'll either be Friday or Tuesday. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. I really do appreciate y'all. Please leave a comment when the stream is over. Hit refresh. If I missed any super chats, just put them in the comments because I pretty much read all the comments and I will answer you. And yeah, that's it. Love y'all. Make sure you subscribe to Grey Waste Tim's channel. He just put out a video yesterday. So go watch that and give it a boost.
Yep.
And
Out of the
Tim,
ages,
make that friggin' video about Danelle Lawston and Bloodraven. That's spicy, dude. That's
hot. I got a lot of things in the works. Yeah, but Out of the Ages is still fresh. That's just put up the other day. Getting to work on the next horror in the gallery. Once I finish Zothic Legend Cycle, I am going to continue doing more read alouds, more probably do Hastur Cycle, but then yes, things like the Danelle Lawston and the Danelle Lawston Bloodraven connection and the whole Guarded by Squishers things that I've been talking about. Those are things I do plan. Just trying to find the time. I work horrible hours. Very busy.
Well, if I were you, Tim, I would do that Bloodraven Danelle Lawston video sooner because that's going to bring people to your channel and then more people will watch your Zothic cycle. But Just throwing it out there. But go subscribe to Tim's channel because all the content is interesting. So yeah, like I said, just watched a new one. Enjoyed the new video intro. Tim's doing the voices. It's good stuff. All right, guys, take care, and I will see you next time.
Good night.